Chapter 599. Indeed, she might as well just lie on the bed with the blankets covering her. She was dressed like this and even exposed all the evidence he had left on her body last night. It was a complete challenge to the little bit of self-control he had left because of her illness. He handed the thermometer to her and turned to leave, saying, "Check the temperature again. If you don't have a fever, you don't need to take the medicine." Jinwan took it, measured it herself and said, 37 degrees. The man grunted and didn't speak. He didn't even look at her again. At this moment his cell phone rang. Jinwan took the opportunity when the man went to the window to answer the call to get out of bed. She picked up her cell phone that had been charged for a while and walked to the bed with it. She heard the man's indifferent tone when he answered the call. It seemed to be a call from a company in America. Judging from his indifferent tone, it was mostly related to Los Angeles. Only then did Jinwan remember that MN Group had moved back to China and only needed to go to London to deal with some matters, but Shine Group's headquarters was still in America. After all, High City was only a branch. Mo Jingshan would be back for a long time this time, but he would eventually return to Los Angeles, wouldn't he? Last time he had casually mentioned it to Mr. Vince. Shine Group was a company with a deep foundation in America for decades. It couldn't be moved as easily as MN Group. That was where Shine Group's foundation was. After all, he couldn't stay in High City for too long. It was already dark. Jinwan leaned against the bed but couldn't fall asleep. There was only one big bed in her room, and Mo Jingshan didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. He slept on this bed last night. Could it be that he planned to sleep here again tonight? Jinwan looked at her cell phone and glanced at the bathroom from time to time. Hearing the sound of water, she knew the man was taking a shower. When the bathroom door opened, she withdrew her gaze and continued to look at her cell phone. There was no need for her to ask. Not long after the shower, the man went straight to the bed. It was as if they were really a married couple who had never divorced. The moment Jinwan sank down on the bed, she glanced at the time and suddenly pursed her lips. "I'm hungry." The man didn't stop lifting the quilt. After moving closer to her, he glanced sideways at the little woman's expression, which was obviously looking for trouble. He didn't expose her. "What do you want to eat?" Jinwan had only eaten some porridge, which was digested quickly. It was already past 10 o'clock at night, almost 11 o'clock. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was hungry. "Noodles, please." Jinwan lowered her eyes and continued to look at her phone, not looking at him. "Since I can only eat bland food now, I can only eat noodles." The man took the phone. "I'll get someone to go to a nearby noodle shop to pack a bowl for you." "I don't want to eat food cooked outside." "Then where do you eat? From the hotel?" "I want to eat your cooking." The man did not speak. Jinwan paused and turned to see that he was looking down at her. She quickly looked away and continued to watch the movie on her phone. She said faintly, "Can't I?" "Forget it then. If this is Xing Tang Hotel, I can ask them to vacate a kitchen for me at any time, and I can cook noodles. Right now, you chose this hotel yourself. I'm not sure if their kitchen can be vacated right now." Mo Jingshan did not seem to have any intention of rejecting her. His tone was patient and gentle. Even if she was purposely making things difficult or sending him away, he did not have any objections. "Well then I won't eat." Jinwan's tone remained mild, her eyes never leaving the phone. "In any case, I was just casually saying it. It's already so late. It's indeed not good to make such a fuss." The phone was currently playing a new movie by a famous director. The opening scene was a fight scene. After watching for a while, Jinwan felt that it was a little messy and switched to another movie. The man's voice rang by her side again. "Do you really want to eat my cooking?" She did not even raise her eyelids. "And I don't have much of an appetite. The takeout noodles are too oily. No matter how good the taste is, I'm not used to it." The man did not speak anymore, but Jinwan could feel that the man had directly lifted the covers and gotten off the bed. She watched as the bed returned to being the only one there. Her gaze finally shifted toward the man's back. She saw that he was going to change his clothes. Was he really going to cook noodles for her? In fact, she was just looking for a reason to not want him to sleep on her bed. But she was indeed a little hungry. It was impossible for Mo Jingshan not to see that she was purposely making things difficult for him and sending him away. However, as she watched the man change into his shirt and trousers, Jinwan quickly withdrew her gaze and lowered her head to watch the movie on her phone. Her heart, however, was suspicious. This hotel was not as big as Xing Tang Hotel, nor was it a hotel invested by Shine Group. It shouldn't be that easy to make them vacate the kitchen for him. However, the man did not take long to leave. The silence in the room formed a sharp contrast with the sound of the movie on her phone. Jinwan suddenly felt like a childish child. Her way of venting was also very childish, but she could not control herself. She guessed that Mo Jingshan wouldn't be back for a while. She put down her phone, got out of bed and searched for some skin cream in her suitcase. She then carefully applied the cream to the skin exposed by her nightgown and rubbed the ambiguous red and purple marks a few more times. She hoped that these marks could be removed as soon as possible. Otherwise, she couldn't wear long sleeves, long pants and high-collared clothes at the beginning of autumn. Besides, High City wasn't as hot as Jing City, and it was still a little hot. It was impossible for her to not see anyone when she went back home. After rubbing for a long time until her skin turned red, she frowned and got up to go back to bed. Now her skin was really hard to leave marks with the slightest force. No wonder the man had been ravaging her body like a demon last night. Jinwan went back to bed with a dark face, lifted the quilt and lay down. She didn't care whether Mo Jingshan went out to buy or cook noodles for her. She just picked up her cell phone and continued to watch the movie, so that she wouldn't be distracted by other things. All of a sudden, her phone vibrated in her hand. Jinwan paused, turned off the movie and opened WeChat to see Mo Jingshan asking her, "What flavor do you want to eat?" Jinwan replied, "Do you have seafood ingredients? Seafood noodles are also good. Anyway, the longer it was cooked, the better." The man sent a voice message. His voice was low, soothing and patient. "Your fever has just subsided. Don't eat seafood. Change to something else." Chapter 600. After that, there was no response. Jinwan glanced at Mo Jingshan's profile picture and name again. Was he going to use her photo as his profile picture all the time? In fact, this photo was quite good. Although she was in the photo, it was not a vulgar selfie. Instead, it seemed to be a picture of the scenery outside the car, but the person sitting in the car was in it. At that time, Jinwan was talking to him, so her expression was natural. When she spoke, she did not put on an angry face, and there was even a slight smile at the corner of her eyes. To be honest, it was quite natural and beautiful. After looking at it for a long time, she suddenly realized that she had become narcissistic when looking at Mo Jingshan's profile picture. She immediately exited WeChat and continued to watch the movie with a straight face. Before she finished watching half of the movie, Mo Jingshan had returned. When he came back, Jinwan turned to see that the man was holding a bowl of steaming noodles in his hand, and it was a very big bowl. As if afraid that she would find fault with him and say that it was not enough, he cooked enough noodles for almost 2 people. Mo Jingshan put the noodles on the table and picked up another smaller bowl. He put the chopsticks aside, picked up some noodles and put them into the smaller bowl. Then he turned to look at Jinwan, who was still sitting on the bed. "Didn't you say you wanted to eat noodles because you were hungry? Come here." Jinwan still sat on the bed and said indifferently, "I don't have the strength to get out of bed to eat." The man glanced at her. When Jinwan met his eyes, she suddenly realized that he would carry her over again. When she was considering whether she should go over herself, the man picked up the bowl and chopsticks and came over. He sat on the bed and patiently picked up the noodles and fed them to her mouth. "Eat." Jinwan glanced at him and pursed her lips without opening her mouth. The man raised his elegant and deep brows. "What? You asked me to cook noodles for you in the middle of the night. Now the noodles are cooked and fed to your mouth. Why don't you eat them? Do you want me to feed you mouth to mouth?" Jinwan looked at the noodles in his hand. "How did you get them to empty the kitchen for you?" The man's expression did not change. He patiently put the noodles back into the bowl and dipped them in the soup to maintain the texture of the noodles. "Money makes the devil turn the millstone. It's just a kitchen." Jinwan did not speak. Alright, this was indeed the most direct method. She pursed her lips. Seeing that he had already brought the noodles to her mouth and had raised it for a long time, she finally opened her mouth and ate the noodles. It was delicious. Even very. After taking a bite, she slowly chewed in her mouth. She could obviously swallow it directly, but she didn't swallow for a long time. Her slow appearance made the man raise his eyebrows. "What's wrong? Did it not taste good?" Against her conscience, Jinwan replied, "It's really not that good." The man snorted, ignoring her words, and fed her another mouthful. "You have to eat whether it's delicious or not. Otherwise, you'll be hungry until tomorrow morning." "I said earlier, I want to eat seafood noodles," Jinwan said vaguely as she opened her mouth to eat the noodles. "First, you can't eat seafood right now. You have to be sure that you won't have a fever tomorrow. You have to avoid food when you're sick. Secondly, how fresh do you think the seafood in the kitchen can be at this time? The freshest ones have been stored for at least 24 hours. The man looked indifferent. "If you want to eat seafood, find an island to eat in a few days. There's no hurry." Who wanted to go to the island with him? Jinwan lowered her head to eat, ignoring him. Actually, it was really delicious. How could Mo Jingshan not understand this little woman's duplicity? It was only because he had bullied her harshly in bed last night that she was already stubborn. Right now, she was even more stubborn and refused to give in easily. After all, he had bullied her to this extent. It was not wrong for her to be ordered around. If it's not enough, there's more, the man reminded. Jinwan's movements of swallowing the noodles suddenly paused. Earlier, she clearly said that it didn't taste good. Yet right now she was eating happily. Every time he fed her a mouthful, she would eat it. With a few slurps, she finished half of the small bowl. She abruptly turned her face away. I'm not eating anymore. Aren't you hungry? How many mouthfuls have you eaten? I'm not eating anymore. Don't mess around. Finish the meal. It's rare for you to have an appetite. More. Jinwan shrunk back into the bed, covering her legs with the blanket. She picked up her phone, intending to continue watching. Mo Jingshan watched her for several seconds before placing down the bowl in his hand. He did not use much force, but his voice carried a hint of coldness. Jinwan. He watched her, calmly calling her name. I know you have a temper right now. Last night, I didn't restrain myself, but I'm afraid I'm not the only reason for everything that happened last night. You were so drunk and ran into the rain. Your words and actions are unable to make me treat you objectively and rationally. Right now I can give in and spoil you, but if you say you want to eat, I'll cook for you. Sure, I'll cook this noodles. No matter if it's delicious or not, you have to finish it for me. Don't make things difficult for your own stomach. Seeing that she was still staring at her phone, the man raised his hand and pinched her chin. However, he softened his voice slightly. Do you really plan on letting me feed you mouth to mouth? Before Jinwan could speak, the man lowered his eyes to watch her. Your temper right now is really no different from before. Stubborn and hard. She was silent for a moment before glancing at him. Back then, didn't you tell me to stop wearing the mask of gentleness and understanding? I'm still the same as before. It's easy to change mountains and rivers, but it's hard to change a person's nature. You're right. I'm still the same. The Jinwan mask that I used to think over and over again in order to keep my marriage and you is gone. Me. Anyway, there's nothing to hide between us. You said I was pretending in front of you because I didn't want to divorce you, but now I'm living like I was in the past. You said I have a bad temper. Mo Jingshan, do you think I'm a clay figurine that you can make round and flatten if you want me to be round and square if you want me to be round? She said so much, but the man only chuckled lightly. He picked up the bowl again. Right now, you're not just having a bad temper. You're also using the words I once said to stab me. If I really wanted to hurt you, I'm afraid you could hold a knife to my neck and scream to kill me at any time. Jinwan glanced at him. She wouldn't scream to kill him. But if it weren't for this matter, if it weren't for the fact that he was doing this for her sake, she would definitely keep her distance from him and would never come to Jing City with him for the rest of her life. If worst came to worst, she would scram back to London. At most, they would never meet again. Chapter 601. After all, if she hid too far away, it would be hard for him to make a move. The man brought the noodles to her mouth again. Jinwan didn't eat. In fact, she really wasn't full, but she didn't want to see him so proud. This time, Mo Jingshan stretched out his arm to pull her out of the quilt, let her sit on his lap and fed her again. If you don't eat, it'll get cold. It's fine if you torture me in the middle of the night, but do you really plan to starve until tomorrow morning? A woman's body was soft and the temperature in the room was very comfortable. She was only wearing a negligee which was very thin. If she sat on his lap, her body would rub against his. Jinwan originally wanted to get down from his arms, but after moving a few times she clearly felt the man's reaction. She was shocked and couldn't believe it. Last night, this man pressed her so violently on the bed and in the bathroom for so long, but now he still had a reaction when he touched her. Glancing at her indescribable expression, Mo Jingshan calmly handed the bowl to her. Although the change in his lower body was very obvious, his handsome face was still calm and indifferent, but his voice was much lower and hoarse, revealing his patience. He stared at her. You continue to torture me until we don't have to sleep anymore. If you don't plan to eat this noodles, I don't mind cooking another bowl for you after I'm full. She wanted to eat noodles, but he said he wanted to eat. Of course, it couldn't be this bowl of noodles. Jinwan's face alternated between red and white. Of course, she was not threatened but angered. She abruptly raised her hand to take the noodles. As she picked up the noodles, she said coldly, Mo Jingshan, it seems that your life as an ascetic monk is really unpleasant. Haven't you always been very self-controlled? Why is it that your brain is full of these things like a worm? When you were in America and Shuyan wasn't married yet, You have a lot of women around you. When you're really hard, why don't you find a woman to solve your physiological problems? Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at her, his thin lips curved into a faint smile. Seeing that the man didn't speak, Jinwan turned to look at him as she ate the noodles and glared at him. Has there really been a woman who wanted to climb into your bed? Her sarcastic words were on the tip of her tongue, but she saw him slightly nod. Do you think it's too little? Jinwan did not speak and lowered her head to eat the noodles. She found that there was a poached egg below and took a bite. The man's tone didn't change as he continued, but it's true that no one else has succeeded except for you. Jinwan's expression was cold. Do I need to crawl? Didn't I sleep with them legally before? Mo Jingshan chuckled lightly, his lips curving slightly. His voice was slightly lazy and heavy. It's legal. I'm used to sleeping with you. In front of me, other women are just pink skeletons. Just looking at them makes me lose my appetite. I don't feel anything so they can't climb up. Jinwan quickly lowered her head to glance at the man's lower body that was clearly poking at her. She said with a straight face, Can you stop looking at me? Either hurry up and get down or let me sit back on the bed. He kept pestering her like this and even talked about climbing into bed. She didn't even feel comfortable eating noodles. Mo Jingshan looked at her awkward expression and smiled mildly. I'm afraid I won't be able to get down myself. Jinwan fiercely swallowed the remaining half of the egg. She abruptly turned around and almost bumped into the man's face. He leaned close to her, his breath landing on her ears. His voice seemed to carry an illusion of bewitchment. You'll help me? She directly stuffed the empty bowl into his hands. Get another bowl? Mo Jingshan raised his brows slightly. His gaze landed on her stiff face and he did not speak. Jinwan felt that his gaze on her was filled with ill intentions. Her voice immediately became sharp. Mo Jingshan, don't even think about it. The man looked at her in amusement. Don't even think about it? What did I say? Jinwan. I want to eat noodles. She turned her face away, wanting to get down from his body but did not dare to move. Mo Jingshan held her waist with one hand. Seeing that she really wanted to eat more, he finally released her and went to the table to get another bowl for her. After Jinwan's fever subsided, it did not rise again. That night, although Mo Jingshan did not do anything to her, it was already very late after eating noodles. Jinwan had no reason to drive him back to Xingtang Hotel, so the man still stayed in her room and climbed onto her bed. Although nothing happened all night and Jinwan placed a pillow in the middle of the bed, when she fell asleep, the man pulled her into his arms. In the morning she opened her eyes in a daze and saw the man's face so close to hers. At first Jinwan thought it was a dream. When she woke up, the sky was already bright. She abruptly sat up on the bed, but the man beside her had already disappeared. She raised her hand and rubbed her head. It didn't hurt as much as it did yesterday and her condition was much better. She took her phone and looked at the time. It was almost noon. There was a WeChat voice message on her phone. It was from Mo Jingshan. She found that since she gave him a WeChat account, the man was very diligent in using it. He said that he had an important meeting in Jing City this morning and asked her to rest in the hotel. He would be back in the afternoon. After Jinwan woke up, she received several calls, most of which were from the company. In fact, she had finished a lot of work in Jing City, and she had met all the people she needed to meet. However, just after she received a call from a business partner, who invited her to meet them in the afternoon. There were some things that she had planned to talk about after returning to High City. Jinwan felt much better now, so she got up, cleaned up, washed and changed clothes. When she took a shower, she saw that the marks on her body were still there. They looked very red yesterday, but today they were a little bruised. It would take at least several days for the marks to disappear. She stood in front of the mirror with a cold face and put on long-sleeved clothes. At the same time, she took a long time to deal with the marks on her neck with concealer. When she arrived at the appointed place, she learned that this Western restaurant was invested by the Rong family's catering company in Jing City. As soon as she heard that it was the Rong family's restaurant, Jinwan looked at the business partner who had been waiting inside for a long time and suddenly felt that today's invitation was not so ordinary. Might be a trap. But since she had come and the business partner had seen her get out of the car and was waiting inside, she had no way out. Chapter 602. Sure enough, as soon as she entered the door, she saw the business partner who had contacted her was standing next to Rong Qing with a big smile on his face. She didn't know what they were talking about. Rong Qing, whom they had only met once or twice last time and didn't have a good impression of, stood there indifferently and looked directly at Jinwan. As soon as she saw this person, Jinwan thought of Rong Yen. She looked at the partner who had asked her to come and said with a smile, "I was wondering why Xiao Zhao would invite me to finalize the cooperation project in one go today. It turns out that there is another reason?" "COG, don't think too much. It's just that CEO Rong and I have a good relationship. Recently, CEO Rong often mentions you. I feel that CEO Rong is interested in COG. I just want to do you a favor and help you get together." Xiao Zhao smiled, and when he looked at Jinwan, his eyes were a little ambiguous. Jinwan smiled and looked indifferently at Rong Cheng, who was standing there like a son of a rich family. "CEO Rong is interested in me? I'm afraid it's not impossible. Xiao Zhao, you're joking too much." Xiao Zhao didn't expect that Jinwan, who was usually good at talking in business, would suddenly speak so directly. He paused and seemed a little embarrassed. But Rong Cheng said, "Why not? COG is so beautiful and so successful at such a young age in the business world. There must be a lot of men who admire you. It's natural for me to fall in love with you." President Zhao chimed in from the side. Yes, yes, yes. President Rong is the most straightforward. If you like her, then so be it. Men and women are just like that. Once they like each other, they can get together. It's not that complicated. Jinwan, Xiao Zhao, you must be a fool. Rong Cheng's eyes were so cold that they almost fell out. How could he see that he was interested in her? Jinwan just smiled and didn't speak. After all, this was a banquet at Hongmen. She would deal with it as it came. "Xiao Zhao, the friends I made an appointment with today are still waiting upstairs. Why don't you go and meet them first? After I finish talking with COG, I'll go upstairs to catch up with you." Rong Cheng turned his eyes to Xiao Zhao. Xiao Zhao immediately understood. Okay, Xiao Rong, COG, take your time. This restaurant was not small. At first glance, she could tell that a casual Western meal here could cost more than 10,000 yuan. Jinwan turned to see that the samples of various ingredients displayed in front of her were also flown in from abroad. As expected, they were very expensive. "COG, have a seat." Now that there was no one around to disturb them, the mysterious smile on Rong Cheng's face became calm and cold. He motioned for Jinwan to sit down first, but his expression was not very polite. Jinwan didn't refuse. She sat down and said flatly, "Xiao Rong called me here because of Xiao Zhao. It can't be as simple as having a meal. I don't have anything to talk about with people I don't know. Why don't you just tell me what you want? Don't waste our time. COG, I invite you here to have a meal with you. I Xiao Rong as I want to talk with you. As possible. I as you as I as possible." With the Rong family's power and wealth, as well as the restaurant invested by the Rong Corporation's catering company, this should be one of the best Western restaurants in Jing City. Xiao Rong is indeed very sincere in inviting me to such a place for dinner. Jinwan smiled faintly. Rong Cheng called the waiter over and casually ordered a few dishes. Most of them were the most expensive dishes in the restaurant. Jinwan had seen a steak from some Western country earlier, priced at 18,000 yuan. There were also several other expensive dishes. It was not that Jinwan had never eaten before, but it was her first time seeing someone ordering so arrogantly. Finally, Rong Cheng ordered a bottle of 1982 Lafite. When the waiter left with the menu, Rong Cheng played with the glass on the table with one hand and looked at Jinwan, who had been sitting quietly opposite him without any emotion. "Although it's a bit tricky to investigate Mo Jingshan's case, I've learned something from some friends in High City. You were married to Mo Jingshan and divorced 3 years ago, right?" Jinwan raised her eyebrows. "Just tell me what you know. You don't have to ask me. If it weren't confirmed, Xiao Rong wouldn't have invited me here to have a meal and drink Lafite, right?" Rong Cheng smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Since COG doesn't want to talk to me for too long, I'll be frank. As far as I know, COG's relationship with the Ji family is not so clear. It seems that Ji Hongwen is not related to you by blood. After you married into the Mo family, you divorced Mo Jingshan less than a year ago. Then you stayed in London for the next 3 years and just returned to China a few months ago. COG, I think you are very talented in the business circle. As long as you have help, no matter whether you are the daughter of the Ji family or not, as long as you get better and better in the future, no one will mention your ordinary background again. As long as MN Group thrives in China, it won't be difficult for you to find a suitable man to marry. As for Mo Jingshan," his voice became indifferent. "My sister hasn't insisted on seeing him these days, but I think she is really sad about him. Since you haven't seen COMO for years, I'm afraid you and COMO are just lovers. After the divorce, you will be far away from each other, and I don't think you have a deep affection for each other. In this case, as long as you let go of Mo Jingshan, The Rong family can do something to MN Group. Before Rong Cheng could finish his words, a figure suddenly walked down the spiral staircase of the restaurant. Since when did Boss Rong start to threaten people like this? This is not the young master of the Rong family I know. Hearing the voice of the man coming down, Jinwan was speechless. When did this bastard Xiao Lui come to Beijing? Was he upstairs just now? Could it be that he was one of the people Rong Cheng said were upstairs today? It was not surprising. There were only a few well-known families in China, such as the Mo family in High City, the Xiao family next door, and the Rong family in Beijing. It was not surprising that the heirs of these big families knew each other. Yes, they knew each other, but she didn't know what their relationship was. Rong Cheng turned his eyes because of the voice, and so did Jinwan, only to see Xiao Lui coming downstairs with a cold smile on his face. Chapter 603. Jinwan did not take Rong Cheng's words seriously. It was just that this Jing Qing family's young master wanted to stand up for his sister. But she didn't expect Xiao Lui to be here. She tilted her head and looked at the approaching man. Xiao Lui took a piece of cake from a passing waiter's plate and put it in front of Jinwan. The food in this restaurant is really good, but I'm afraid it's not to your taste. You'd better take a few bites of the cake. Seeing it was the young master of the Xiao family, the waiter didn't dare to say anything and went back to fetch more cakes. Jinwan looked at the cake in front of her and said gently and meaningfully, I wonder why so many big shots have gathered in Beijing recently. Even CEO Xiao has come here. Xiao Lui, still with one hand in his trouser pocket, stood by the table and said with a smile, even a big shot like Mo Jingshan has been blown to Jing City, which shows how wonderful Jing City has been recently and how many profitable projects there are. It's not surprising that people from all walks of life have come here. What? Only your Mo Jingshan can come here, but I can't come here to meet my friends? Jinwan smiled and pretended to be enthusiastic. Not really. She pointed to the seat on the other side of the table. CEO Xiao, if you don't mind sitting next to me, I'll ask someone to add another chair for you. Let's eat together? You're Mo Jingshan? Rong Cheng sat quietly on the other side and his eyes fell on Xiao Li's face again. In recent years he had never heard of the Xiao family and the Ji family, and the Xiao family and the Mo family were neighbors. They were like two kings of a land. They were two different families, but why did Xiao Li's words sound different? No need to add another chair. Xiao Lui raised his handsome eyebrows and glanced at the sofa chair Jinwan was sitting on. Isn't your seat big enough? Can't you let me sit with you? Before Jinwan could speak, Xiao Lui had sat down on the sofa on her side as if they were very familiar with each other. Without any gap, he sat next to her, so close as if they had known each other for a long time. Seeing this, Rong Cheng took a look at Xiao Lui and didn't know what he meant. If the young master of the Xiao family had any romantic feelings for Jinwan, he wouldn't have mentioned Mo Jingshan just now. Rong Cheng had been in the business circle for many years and lived in Beijing, so he had a lot of contacts with the heirs of the big families in the country. However, although he didn't have much contact with Xiao Lui, he at least knew that Xiao Lui didn't have many women around him. It was said that Xiao Lui had pursued Shi Niange, the daughter of Shida Group, for many years but never got what he wanted. What kind of ability did this Jinwan have? One Mo Jingshan wasn't enough, and now she even had Xiao Lui to support her. After sitting down with Xiao Lui, Jinwan just glanced at him calmly, and Xiao Lui also glanced at her as if it was natural for them to sit together like this. Jinwan didn't speak. She was not interested in the luxurious Western food that Rong Cheng treated her to. Although the cake that Xiao Lui gave her was also from this restaurant, it was Xiao Lui's treat and had nothing to do with Rong Cheng. She picked up the small fork and took a few bites of the cake. Seeing that Jinwan didn't intend to avoid arousing suspicion, Rong Cheng couldn't tell what kind of relationship she had with Xiao Lui. COG. Rong Cheng looked at her and said with a meaningful smile, I didn't know that MN Group and Ling Xiao Group have many connections. What he found out about MN Group had something to do with the Ji family, the Mo family, or even London, but Ling Xiao Group didn't seem to be involved. Not really, but we've met in High City, and CEO Xiao and I have had a few simple interactions in private. CEO Rong, you don't have to be so extreme and deep. We're all friends. Isn't our relationship on the table? Jinwan took a sip of the cream on her fork, and the smile on her lips was extremely faint. Really? But it seems that CEO Zhao's relationship with you is not just on the table. For so many years, except for Miss Shi in High City, no woman can get within 1 meter of CEO Xiao. He is famous for not being interested in women. Rong Cheng said and glanced at Xiao Lui with a smile. Has CEO Xiao changed recently? Xiao Lui sat next to Jinwan. Except for handing her a cake, He didn't do anything but casually glanced at Jinwan eating the cake. As soon as Rongqing said this, Jinwan saw that Xiao Lui didn't want to say more, and a waiter brought the food over. Although he didn't treat people coldly like Mo Jingshan, he didn't look at people directly, and he didn't even look at Rongqing. Rongqing seemed to be more restrained when he spoke to Xiao Lui and was not as arrogant and condescending as before. Xiao Lui picked up the cup of Americano the waiter put in front of Jinwan and took a sip. Jinwan turned to look at him. "This is the coffee I ordered. Women should just drink cappuccino or mocha with sugar and milk. Why would you drink Americano? Don't you think it's bitter?" Xiao Lui held the coffee cup, glanced at her and snorted. "Be careful. You'll have yellow teeth." Jinwan. "I've been relying on Americano when I'm sleepy at work these years, and now I'm used to drinking it." Xiao Lui looked at her white teeth and smiled. He still held her cup of coffee and said lightly, "You should change your habits since you've come back to China. Drink less coffee and more juice or water. Sooner or later you'll get pregnant and have a baby. You should eat healthily and pay attention to your health. Otherwise, if you drink too much coffee and give birth to a little black coal for the Mo family, Grandfather Mo will probably die of anger." What was he talking about? Jinwan's face turned livid and she glared at him. Xiao Lui still didn't care and drank half of her coffee. She was about to speak when she saw from the corner of her eye that Rongqing, who was sitting opposite, didn't look very good. Obviously it was because of Xiao Lui's words. So, did Xiao Lui really come to support her? Was their relationship so close that when one party was in trouble, the other would come to help? They had only met a few times, okay? Chapter 604. Xiao Lui naturally sat by her side and chatted with her. Recently there have been a lot of events in Beijing. All kinds of banquets and financial symposiums have gathered here. Many people are not qualified to come. Did Mo Jingshan bring you here? In fact, Jinwan didn't really want to mention Mo Jingshan. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and trousers and had been sitting under the air conditioner for fear that her sweat would ruin the concealer. If that happened, the marks on her neck would be exposed. At that time, even if she wanted to say that she had nothing to do with Mo Jingshan, she might not be able to explain herself. But it was Mo Jingshan's idea that she came to Beijing. She nodded. Seeing Jinwan nod, Xiao Lui raised his eyebrows and smiled, and Rongqing's face darkened. After all, MN Group has moved back to China. It's not bad to come to Beijing occasionally. If Mo Jingshan and I don't have time, you can ask CEO Rong for help. At this time, Xiao Lui turned his eyes to Rongqing and said with a meaningful smile, "President Rong is one of the most influential young men in the capital. Not to mention the Rong family in the capital, the Rong's group alone can compete with the major domestic companies. With his strength, it's easy for him to help you contact some partners in the capital or help you gain a foothold in the capital circle." Rongqing glanced at Xiao Lui and heard Xiao Lui continue, "President Rong, we've been friends for many years. If my sister comes to the capital again, I'll have to rely on you." Rongqing raised his eyebrows. "Sister? Why haven't I heard that you have a sister? What? Is COG your sworn sister?" Jinwan also got goosebumps when she heard the word, sister. Xiao Lui smiled naturally. Xiao Lui's smile couldn't be more natural. Sort of. Everyone in the circle knows that CEO Rong dotes on his sister. Your second miss has been taken care of by you since she was a child. It's rare for a loner like me to have a sister I want to take care of. Jinwan is stubborn, but in fact she has a good character. My father likes her very much and always wants to invite her home for dinner. She doesn't want to cause misunderstandings, so she rarely talks about these things." Hearing Xiao Lui said his father also liked Jinwan, Rongqing took a few more glances at Jinwan. Jinwan hadn't contacted Mr. Xiao Jinjuan since she met him last time. She didn't ask much and he didn't say much, but in fact many things were self-evident. "Sister? Who's his sister?" Rongqing sneered and said, "I didn't expect COG to have such a close relationship with the Xiao family. In this case we don't need to be so distant anymore. In the future, Miss Ji, you can indeed come to Jing City more often. You are at a marriageable age, so you should let go of your old feelings. I will find more suitable men for you so you won't feel wronged." Jinwan put down the little fork in her hand, smiled and said in a lazy voice, "CEO Rong, you've been concerned about my feelings and marriage again and again. How can I be distant? You're the boss of a listed company. Don't you think you're too idle to care about other people's affairs?" Jinwan's words were not polite at all. Xiao Lui turned his head, looked at Jinwan's delicate and fair face, turned his eyes with a smile and said lightly, "Yes, CEO Rong really cares about your affairs. Is it possible that CEO Rong is going to start a marriage agency business? I advise you to stop. After all, it's an unpopular business. In this industry, people often shoot themselves in the foot. It's a thankless and unprofitable business. Don't do it. Rong Qing raised his eyebrows slightly, and the smile on his lips deepened and became colder. He thought Xiao Lui just couldn't bear to see Jin Wan being wronged here, so he came to join in the fun. He didn't expect that the Xiao family's elder Xiao, who had never participated in any disputes in the circle, would be so straightforward. Jin Wan seemed to have a strong presence in the Xiao family, and Jin Wan's family background was unknown. If he put all these together, interesting. Rong Cheng's lips were full of smiles. Of course I can't do that. After all, no one knows whether the girl introduced to him is first-hand or second-hand. What if she's a divorced woman and she's married like a virgin? It's not easy to deal with her if she comes back to settle the score with me. He picked up the tissue under the plate on the table and wiped his hands. What's going on the second floor? Aren't there 2 tables playing cards? Xiao Xiao, did you lose too much so you came out to take a walk? But you've been out for too long. Won't your superiors be impatient? Xiao Lui raised his dark eyes slightly, looked at Rong Qing who was about to eat and gave a cold smile. He played with the coffee cup on the table with his well-defined fingers and gently tapped it. When he turned to look at Jin Wan again, his eyes reflected Jin Wan's equally calm and cold figure. Jin Wan was born with a face that could enchant all living things. However, over the years, her brows had long been accustomed to revealing a reserved and restrained expression. She was so cold that it seemed as though she would not be affected by anyone's attacks. She was so noble and cold that it seemed as though she was unapproachable. Even if the other party was Rong Qing. She continued to eat the cake that Xiao Lui gave her and didn't touch the various Western dishes that gradually filled the table. Seeing Jin Wan's expression didn't change at all, but he was a bit displeased by Xiao Lui's words and said those indecent words. Rong Cheng's eyes gradually became calm and indifferent. I don't think COG has an appetite. Since you're here, why don't we go to the second floor to play cards? In recent years, COG's business has been going smoothly. I reckon that his luck should be very smooth. If he goes to the poker table, he will probably be able to win millions of dollars in a few minutes. With that, Rong Qing got up and asked the waiter to go upstairs to inform those people that a friend downstairs wanted to join them. Jin Wan drank the juice and ate the cake. Her gaze followed Rong Cheng's back. Seeing that he had gone upstairs first, she pursed her red lips into a cold smile and said unhurriedly, Xiao Xiao, can I refuse this game of cards? Xiao Lui glanced at her. You're really good at making trouble. How could you provoke someone like Rong Qing? Chapter 605. Xiao Lui raised his eyebrows and said flatly, if Rong Yin knows that Mo Jingshan is married and only has you, and he even takes you with him to Beijing, she will understand and stop pestering him. Yes, Miss Rong didn't pester him, but her brother doesn't seem to want to let it go. It's not up to him to decide whether to let it go or not. It's possible that he doesn't like you. After all, he always tries his best to satisfy whatever his sister likes. Now his sister finally has a man she likes. I'm afraid Mo Jingshan won't even look her in the eye. Rong Qing won't let it go so easily. Jin Wan glanced at the second floor. Rong Qing had gone up. She looked at Xiao Lui. Can I go up? Who are there? Will someone beat me up? Xiao Lui smiled. No one can beat you. As long as I'm here, no one dares to do anything to you. Just stay by my side and I'll let you play cards. It's easy for you to win millions of yuan. Do all of you crown princes play such a big game together? Not bad. Xiao Lui smiled. Even Xiao Lui thought that she couldn't leave so easily now. Since Rong Qing had said so, if she turned around and left now, she would only avoid the storm and would only have more negative effects. Besides, although she wasn't good at playing cards, she wouldn't easily show her weakness. After all, the entertainment in London was not as luxurious as in China, but she wouldn't easily show her weakness. Jin Wan got up and went up. Seeing her fearless look, Xiao Lui snorted, thinking that Jin Wan's character of going up the mountain despite knowing there was a tiger was quite similar to that of the Xiao family. As soon as she went upstairs, the door of the innermost VIP room suddenly opened, and a woman in a tight black dress staggered out of it, reeking of alcohol. When she saw Jin Wan, she only took a glance at Jin Wan and then continued to walk out drunkenly. When Xiao Lui also came up, the woman's eyes lit up. Just as Jin Wan was wondering if this private room was the one they mentioned, a woman's confession suddenly rang from behind her. Jin Wan looked back only to see that the woman in the tight black dress threw herself into Xiao Lui's arms and said in a trembling voice, I like you. When I first saw you when I was 15, I fell in love with you. When I was a child, you said I was too old-fashioned and monotonous, and you didn't bother to invite me to eat, drink, play, or go anywhere. Now I've changed so much. Can you give me a chance? I really love you. This sudden confession was heard by Jin Wan. She looked at Xiao Lui in surprise. The man's suit was about to be torn apart by the woman, but the man only had one hand in his trouser pocket. He looked indifferent, yet he seemed to have the gentleness of an acquaintance who grew up together. But Jin Wan felt that Xiao Lui would refuse. This was because this man, who usually appeared cold and strange after his casual flirtation, was even colder than Mo Jingshan. Can you give me a chance? I've liked you for more than 10 years, and it's rare for me to pluck up the courage to say so much to you today, but just now you suddenly left without even giving me a chance to speak in the private room. The woman's confession was affectionate and persistent, but Xiao Lui didn't withdraw his hand from his trouser pocket. He took a step back unhurriedly, pushing the woman in his arms away by an arm's length. At the same time, he let go of his hand and didn't touch her again. With some distance between them, he paused and lifted his eyelids to look at the drunk and sexy woman in front of him, who no longer looked old-fashioned and monotonous. He faintly pursed his thin and cold lips. No matter if you are the simple little girl from back then or the way you are now, I don't like you. There's no need to waste too much time and persistence on me. I won't like you now, and I won't have any feelings for you even after 10 years, understand? The woman's shoulders immediately sank and she asked unwillingly, is that sure Niange worth pursuing for so long? For so many years she has never responded to you. Everyone knows that she has been entangled with Qin Siding for so many years, but you have never had a place in her heart. Why do you still? Xiao Lui's eyes turned cold. You've drunk too much and even talked too much? His voice was not high and his eyes were coldly narrowed. He seemed to be careless, but the air around him was as cold as frost. The woman immediately stopped talking, but from Jin Wan's point of view, she seemed to be crying. This world was always like this. Excellent men and women were always pursued, and those who didn't know how to refuse often got a seemingly romantic and touching love because of their soft-heartedness, but in the end they found that the other party was not suitable for them. If they really didn't like him, they might as well refuse him from the beginning. Although it sounded cruel, it was true that she hadn't fallen in love for more than 10 years. How could she fall in love with someone just because she changed her mind? Just like Jin Wan herself in her previous life, when she was just reborn, she often restrained her temper and forced herself to change, but Mo Jingshan knew her too well. He knew what kind of person she was, whether she was proud and unattainable or gentle and considerate. In fact, she was still the same person. People just needed to live as they were and didn't need to deliberately wear a mask that made them too tired. Mo Jingshan had indeed helped her find her former self step by step. At least she wouldn't compromise for anyone or anything. At least she no longer wore such a heavy mask on her face, and she didn't need to carry so many burdens that she shouldn't carry. The woman was drunk. After crying for a while, she was helped into the room. Before entering the room, Jin Wan turned to look at Xiao Lui. Although Xiao Lui was really cold and didn't give the woman any face, at least he didn't take advantage of her love to play with her, which showed that he was not a scumbag. The door of the private room in front of him was wide open. It was obvious that the wine had been drunk long ago. The sounds of playing cards and the sounds of men and women laughing and discussing something could be heard clearly from inside. Jin Wan paused. Thinking that this party was invited by Rong Qing, the people here must be close to the Rong family. Now she only had Xiao Lui to talk to, but she didn't know him very well. Was he reliable? As if seeing the hesitation in Jin Wan's eyes, Xiao Lui came over and glanced at her indifferently. Since Rong Qing has investigated you and knows that you are supported by the Mo family, no one here dares to eat you. Chapter 606. Jin Wan's pale face was very indifferent. I just don't want to cause unnecessary disputes and disasters. If I knew what was going to happen from the beginning, I wouldn't have come today. Just now, I faced Rong Qing alone downstairs, but this game of cards, is it really just a game of cards? Jin Wan's face was cold. After a few seconds, the man burst into laughter. You're right. Although Rong Qing arranged today's party, it's only because there are a lot of people in the circle in the capital recently. The Rong family wants to use this opportunity to build relationships with all parties. Rong Qing just invited a lot of people on behalf of the Rong family. We'll have dinner, drink, and play cards. I guess he'll officially invite everyone to the Rong family's grandpa's birthday party. Jin Wan looked inside again. So how big is the Rong family's birthday party? Xiao Lui rubbed his chin and smiled. I don't know how big the party is, but even the Xiao family and the Mo family have been invited. It must be a big party. Jin Wan glanced at him. Will Mo Jingshan also come? I don't know. The invitation should be sent out, but I don't know whether Mo Jingshan will come or not. But since Rong Qing dared to invite you, I guess he must have guessed that Mo Jingshan won't come. Jin Wan pursed her lips. Don't tell him whether he will come or not. Anyway, I don't want to be misunderstood by others. Xiao Lui said playfully, if you don't want to be misunderstood, don't do anything that will make people misunderstand you. Jin Wan was a bit unhappy with his playful tone. What will make people misunderstand you? Xiao Lui smiled and suddenly scratched Jin Wan's neck with his finger. His voice was indifferent and a bit sarcastic. Shouldn't you go and have your concealer replenished? Jin Wan. She suddenly covered her neck with her hand, looked at him in surprise, turned around and walked quickly into the bathroom not far away. After entering, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, only to find that there was only a little bit of her nipple, but it was not obvious. She had to look carefully to see it. How could Xiao Lui see this? Jin Wan took out concealer from her bag and carefully applied it. When she walked out, she saw Xiao Lui standing outside the bathroom with his arms crossed and looking at her with an ambiguous smile. Is it possible between you and Mo Jingshan? I think Rong Qing is really going to introduce you to someone who is of a similar social status to distract you. Jin Wan didn't take it seriously. It doesn't seem to have much to do with whether I will be eaten here today. After all, he is not here now, is he? The two of them walked into the private room. As Jin Wan had expected, it was filled with people she was not familiar with. There were only a few faces that she seemed to have seen at some banquets and social events, but they were all unfamiliar. Seeing Xiao Lui come in, these people were about to ask him to continue playing cards when they suddenly saw a woman beside him. They immediately glanced at Jin Wan with all kinds of suggestive eyes. Rong Qing was sitting on the sofa, his handsome face lowered as if listening to the people around him. Hearing the noise, he looked up at the door of the private room and smiled. COG, since you're here, don't be so reserved. Sit down and let's sit down. COG? Which COG? Which COG could it be? Looking at the entire country, I'm afraid the only woman with the surname G is the one from MN Group who is respected by our CEO Rome. Oh, I remember. She's the beauty on the Forbes list this year, right? Come on, sit down. I didn't have a chance to get to know you at the banquet last time. There were too many people at that time. What a coincidence. Beauty G, come on, sit down and let's sit down. The people in the private room didn't see Rong Qing's hostility towards Jin Wan, and Rong Qing didn't say anything because Xiao Lui was here, but several people could see that he was not very happy with Jin Wan, so when they looked at Jin Wan again, their eyes were full of all kinds of strange looks. It was rare to see someone who could make CEO Rong unhappy, especially a woman. However, Jin Wan didn't even look at Rong Qing after entering the room but just nodded and smiled at the people around her. Someone was about to come over and shake hands with her, when Xiao Lui suddenly put his arm around her shoulder and pressed her down on a chair not far away. Oh CEO Xiao, what are you? Take back your dog paw. Do you think you can hold Miss G's hand so easily? Xiao Lui scolded half-jokingly and helped Jin Wan block those young men who were too close to her. What? Is COG so charming? Has CEO Xiao ushered in the second spring of his life? Instead of fighting to the death with Shirniansh, you're now fighting COG? Two people teased him as they handed him cigarettes. Jin Wan calmly glanced at the people here. It seemed that Xiao Lui was young and frivolous when he first pursued Shirniansh. It seemed that everyone who was familiar with him knew about his dirty deeds. However, this man just narrowed his eyes and held the cigarette that had just been lit. He sat beside Jin Wan and calmly puffed out a cloud of smoke, saying nothing about Shirniansh. Because of Xiao Lui's presence, the people who were curious about Jin Wan didn't dare to approach, but two men and a woman by Rong Qing's side came up, knocked on the table in front of Jin Wan and looked down at her. COG, since you're here, don't be so reserved. Would you like to play cards with us? There happens to be an empty table next to it. Jin Wan turned to see that the table was actually a mahjong table and smiled. Sorry, I'm not very good at mahjong. Alas, why are you so modest? How many people in this business circle don't know how to play mahjong? This is a national treasure. The woman winked at her, but there was a hint of contempt in her eyes. Jin Wan said frankly, I'm telling the truth. I didn't know how to play mahjong when I was in China. Later, when I was abroad, the entertainment of foreign friends didn't include mahjong, so I became even more unfamiliar with it. If you really want to play, of course I can accompany you, but I'm too bad at mahjong. If I play too slowly, please don't mind. No, let's play together. The woman reached out and took Jinwan's arm as if they had known each other for a long time. Jinwan didn't need her to pull her. She got up, took her hand out of the woman's hand and walked straight to the table. Chapter 607. The man looked at him in surprise. Seeing that he had sat down and was sitting next to Jinwan, he was amused. "CEO Xiao, what do you mean?" Xiao Lui, with a cigarette in his mouth, narrowed his eyes, rested his hand on the table casually, and glanced at him with a smile. "I'm playing mahjong. What else can I mean? Isn't there another table in your room? We've just asked COG to sit down, and now you come up and take my seat. You're too obvious. Are you afraid that others don't know you like COG? Why don't I accompany the beauty I brought in and play with those drunkards?" Xiao Lui puffed a smoke ring at him. "They need one more player. Go and be my substitute." The man was speechless. After all, he had to suck up to CEO Rong, and he couldn't afford to offend CEO Xiao. After thinking for a while, he turned to another table in the private room. Obviously, the woman across the table didn't expect that Xiao Lui, who never played mahjong with women, would suddenly sit down. She exchanged a look with the other man in surprise, and then they looked at Jinwan. Jinwan pressed the button on the table as if nothing had happened. "How do you operate this mahjong table?" The woman next to her reached out and pressed the button for her. Then she glanced at Jinwan's calm face and thought that CEO Rong must have looked at her with displeasure just now. She had to find an opportunity to target her. However, Xiao Lui, who was sitting at the same table, obviously didn't intend to let them play this game. For example, if the woman and the man who came with her played a mahjong tile, and Jinwan didn't touch it, Xiao Lui would definitely get it. And Xiao Lui won 2 consecutive mahjong tiles from them. Every time Jinwan played a mahjong tile, he just skipped it. The 3 people at the table could see that he was going easy on her, and no one said anything. Of course, Jinwan wouldn't say anything. Although she didn't win, at least she won some money by hitting the bar. She didn't stand out and she didn't lose face. This was already very satisfying, okay? Then they continued the game. This time, the cards in Jinwan's hand were slightly complicated. In the end, there were only a few cards left. It was almost time for the call. Under the urging of the woman by the side, she played a 60,000. Xiao Lui coldly glanced at the card she played and didn't speak. However, after another round, Xiao Lui won again. When he showed his cards, the woman on the opposite side looked at his cards and shouted angrily, "Mr. Xiao, you obviously have 360,000 yuan in your hand. Why didn't you bet just now? Do you think it's so easy to cheat after a fight?" Xiao Lui said calmly. "Why can't it be easy? I could have just touched 2 at that time." The woman had already lost hundreds of thousands of yuan in these 3 rounds. She was so angry that her hair was about to explode. The man next to her saw how agitated she was. They just wanted to suck up to Mr. Rong, but they didn't want to be so blatant in front of Mr. Xiao. He simply said, "All right, that's enough. I've seen you only win a few rounds at other tables. Do you still want to teach Mr. Xiao with your skills?" The woman heard the warning and reminder in the man's words. She paused and then stiffened. She didn't speak anymore and continued to play cards. But she was really angry. Xiao Lui had obviously gone easy on her just now. Now he was clearly robbing her of her money. Just now, CEO Xiao had been winning against everyone's cards. Now he finally had a chance to win against Jinwan, but he didn't even want to bet. In the next few rounds, Jinwan really didn't know how to play. She just knew how to play, but she didn't play well. The woman next to her was too angry because she lost the last round. She was lucky this round and had been trying to pick on Jinwan. Finally, she won a big bet. Jinwan only put 100 chips on the table, and in an instant, the woman won more than 80. In the next 2 rounds, Jinwan looked at the 2 pitiful chips in front of her and said, "Shall I call someone else to play? I really don't know how to play. I've almost lost all my chips." Xiao Lui threw 2 dozen to her. "Use mine." Jinwan looked incredulously at the many chips in front of her. The woman on the table, the man, CEO Xiao casually threw more than 1,000,000 yuan. No wonder he was the son of Ling Xiao Group. The woman said unhappily, "CEO Xiao, each chip is 10,000 yuan. You threw so many chips to her. If she loses all..." Before she finished, Xiao Lui glanced at Jinwan and said with a smile, "You can lose as much as you want. I'll pay for it." The woman was so angry that she almost pushed the cards in front of her down. She suppressed her temper and continued to play. They played another round. Jinwan's cards were not bad this time, and she could win several of Xiao Lui's cards. The man on the other side felt that CEO Xiao was determined to protect Jinwan, so he didn't make things difficult for her. He judged the situation and put down a card for Jin Wan, letting her win one round. "Cog, you said you didn't play well. Isn't it good?" the man said with a smile. Jin Wan just smiled. She could understand everything on the table and didn't care about his words. However, after another round, Jin Wan won again. This time she won Xiao Lui's cards. She raised her eyes and glanced at him with a smile. "Sorry, Xiao Xiao, I won again." Xiao Lui didn't bat an eyelid and lost calmly. He casually threw another handful of chips to her. "Count how much you should win." When he showed his cards, the woman on the other side saw Xiao Lui's cards and cried out, "Xiao Xiao, your cards are good. Why did you break them apart?" "You broke them apart, but Cog won every one of them." Jin Wan also glanced at Xiao Lui's cards. Yes, she won every one of them. But even though she thought so, Jin Wan still took the chips she should win and secretly gave Xiao Lui a grateful look. This little girl, she still pretended to be a good girl. Xiao Lui didn't pay attention to anyone. After 2 rounds, Jin Wan took advantage of her sudden good luck and the generous support of the 2 men at the table and won several rounds in a row. In the end, the woman on the table continued to play for a while because she was unwilling to give up. Seeing that she had lost 7 or 8 million yuan, and more than half of it was won by Jin Wan, she got up angrily and said, "I quit. It's boring. I'm going to drink." With that, the woman turned and slipped back to Rongqing, but Rongqing just watched coldly from time to time and didn't order anyone to do anything, so he couldn't comfort her now. Chapter 608. After the mahjong game was over, the man got up and went to Rongqing's side. Jin Wan counted her chips attentively, and Xiao Lui sat on the side and laughed at her naivety. "So just a few million yuan can make you so happy?" "I'm not that happy, but I'm really happy." Jin Wan put away the chips with a smile. "After all, I won the money by playing a few rounds of mahjong. It's much easier than the money I earned by flying around and signing contracts. It's free money. Why can't I be happy?" Xiao Lui sneered and was about to get up, when 24 chips were suddenly thrown to him. He paused and took a look at her. "I'll pay you back with a lot of interest." With that, Jin Wan got up and left the table. Xiao Lui, this private room was very large and was divided into several compartments, luxurious and well-equipped. Jin Wan went to the other side after playing mahjong. Xiao Lui said a few words to the passers-by and winked at her, telling her to stay in a place with fewer people, in case those people around Rongqing tried to make trouble for her again. Jin Wan turned around and was about to find a place to sit down and send a text message to ask if Xiao Ba had booked a ticket from Jing City to Hai City for her online. She didn't have to stay in Jing City for long and could leave at any time. However, as soon as she turned around, she was caught off guard by a pair of eyes. She paused and her heart skipped a beat. His eyes were calm and dark. It seemed that he had been looking at her for a long time since he entered the room. He was calm and indifferent. Mo Jingshan's long legs moved, approaching her. Jin Wan stood still and didn't move or look away, but the other people in the room all looked at them. When Mo Jingshan came in, they didn't expect that CEO Mo would come. When they finally realized what was going on, they saw that Mo Jingshan was already walking towards Jin Wan. When he was about 2 meters away from them, a figure suddenly rushed over, grabbed the man's arm and said excitedly, "CEO Mo, you're really here. Come on, go inside and sit down." It was the woman who had been trying to make things difficult for Jin Wan at the mahjong table. Mo Jingshan stopped, lowered his head, and his handsome face was indifferent. "Take your hand away." Hearing his cold words and seeing the man's unapproachable look, the woman was startled and hurriedly withdrew her hand. She didn't dare to touch him again, not even a corner of his clothes. However, after a moment of hesitation, she still said, "CEO Mo, we didn't expect you to come. Since it's CEO Rong's arrangement today, do you want to talk to CEO Rong alone?" "No, I don't have anything to do with CEO Rong's invitation." Mo Jingshan's eyes didn't linger on the woman. When he saw the chips in Jin Wan's hand, he frowned. "Did you play cards with them just now?" Ji didn't say anything. Xiao Xiao Xiao. Xiao came over with a smile. "Xiao Mo, why?" "I played a few rounds of mahjong with Miss Ji. Are you worried?" Originally, Mo Jingshan's eyes were a bit heavy. However, when he heard that Xiao Lui had been by Jin Wan's side, even playing cards with her, he glanced at Xiao Lui, and the heaviness in his eyes gradually dissipated. The Xiao family's presence saved him a lot of trouble. Xiao Lui walked over, leaned to Mo Jingshan's side, and whispered something in his ear. Of course, no one could hear what he said, not even Jin Wan. She could only see Xiao Lui's enigmatic smile when he spoke and Mo Jingshan's calm and expressionless face. The people in the room stared at Mo Jingshan. They just couldn't figure out why this almighty man, who had always been difficult to invite, came here. The Rong family and the Mo family in High City didn't seem to have much contact with each other, so it was natural that Mo Jingshan didn't attend the Rong family's birthday party. After all, the Mo family didn't need to give the Rong family face. So it was quite surprising that Mo Jingshan came here. What was even more surprising was that Mo Jingshan said that he came here had nothing to do with CEO Rong's invitation, but CEO Rong did send him an invitation. Wasn't this a slap in CEO Rong's face in public? However, Mo Jingshan didn't look at anyone since he came in. His eyes were fixed on Jinwan. After saying a few words with CEO Xiao, everyone was still waiting for Mo Jingshan's next move. Mo Jingshan didn't even say goodbye to CEO Rong but took Jinwan's hand and left. He took her hand. Mo Jingshan took Jinwan's hand and left in public. Except for Xiao Lui and Rong Cheng, everyone else in the room was shocked. What happened? Didn't they hear that CEO Rong's sister liked CEO Mo? Now, when she turned around and saw Rong Cheng's face, which was obviously humiliated in front of everyone, the room instantly fell silent. Before leaving, Jinwan didn't forget to exchange her chips for money. She didn't feel relieved until the money she won was actually in her card. Seeing this woman, who was worth tens of billions, acting like a money grubber, Mo Jingshan patiently waited for her and didn't urge her. Outside the restaurant, Jinwan saw Xiao, who parked the car outside and stuck his head out of the window to say hello to Jinwan. Jinwan raised her hand and waved at Xiao, who saying hello to him. "Have you eaten?" the man asked. "I ate some cake. Too sweet." "I don't feel hungry yet," Jinwan answered truthfully. She walked to the car door and was about to raise her hand to open the door, when the man next to her opened the door for her and motioned for her to get in the car. Jinwan looked at him. "I'll go back to the hotel tonight to get my luggage and go back to High City tomorrow." The man didn't seem to hear her. "Get in the car." Looking into his dark and deep eyes, Jinwan turned and got in the car. Xiao, who was still in the same state, automatically blocking out all the sounds behind the car and concentrating on driving. It seemed that he was driving to the hotel where she lived, not Xingtang Hotel. When they arrived at the hotel, Mo Jingshan obviously didn't intend to leave. He asked Xiao Hu to drive back to Xingtang Hotel alone. Jinwan wanted to tell him to go back, but the man said that he would send her back to her room to see if her temperature was stable below 37 degrees. After making sure she was fine, he would leave. He had asked Xiao Hu to drive the car away. Where could he go? Jinwan pursed her lips and didn't speak. She entered the elevator expressionlessly and went upstairs, ignoring the man beside her. Chapter 609. Before she finished speaking, the doorbell suddenly rang. Jinwan paused and turned to look at the door that had just been closed. Who would ring the doorbell at this time? She didn't see any room service staff on this floor, and it was already past 8 o'clock. Even room service wouldn't bother her at this time. Jinwan put down the thermometer and was about to open the door when she looked back to see that Mo Jingshan had picked up the thermometer she had just put down and looked at it as if to make sure if she still had a fever. In less than a minute, Jinwan's cell phone also rang. She picked it up and saw that it was a call from Xiaoba. She picked it up. "Hello? Boss, aren't you in the room?" Xiaoba's voice came from the phone and outside the door. "Jinwan. Was it you who rang the doorbell just now?" "It was me." Xiaoba smiled. "I just came out of the bathroom on the first floor of the hotel and vaguely saw your back entering the elevator. I ran over and didn't catch up with the elevator. I just came up now." Jinwan put down the phone and was about to open the door when she paused and suddenly raised her hand to grab Mo Jingshan's arm. This was the first time she had taken the initiative to touch him since returning to China. The man had just put down the thermometer. Because of her action, his elegant and deep brows moved slightly. He glanced at her, but Jinwan pushed him into the bathroom without saying a word and raised her hand to make a shoo gesture at Mo Jingshan's puzzled and even somewhat puzzled gaze. Mo Jingshan. The bathroom door was mercilessly closed by Jinwan. Although there was nothing shameful about Mo Jingshan, the relationship between her and Mo Jingshan was, after all, unclear. Xiaoba had been particularly excited when she saw him, as if her boss would soon return to the Mo family. Right now, if she were to discover Mo Jingshan in her room at such a late hour in Jing City, it was likely that her mind would come up with a long romantic love story. Most importantly, she could not stop her excitement. Furthermore, Xiaoba was especially fawning over Mo Jingshan and could not wait to shove her into Great Boss Mo's arms. TSK, so she'd better not let Xiaoba see it. After confirming that the person in the bathroom was cooperative and did not intend to come out, Jinwan turned to open the door. As soon as the door was opened, Xiaoba looked into the room behind Jinwan. She couldn't see inside, so she stood on tiptoe and peeped in. Jinwan's eyelids jumped. "What are you looking at? Is there anyone else in your room?" "No." Jinwan lowered her hand from the doorknob. Xiaoba directly walked in with a small suitcase. She glanced around and then said with a smile, "You've been in Beijing with Xiaomo for so many days. I thought the two of you would be together." Jinwan glanced at the small suitcase in Xiaoba's hand and changed the topic. "Why did you suddenly come to Beijing?" Once they got down to business, Xiaoba turned around and said, "Didn't you say that you had a fever yesterday when you called me to help you book the plane ticket? I was afraid that there would be no convenient person to take care of you in Beijing. After all, you didn't even bring an assistant this time, and I was afraid that no one would take care of you if you had a fever on the way back, so after hanging up the phone in the morning, I've booked the plane ticket for tomorrow. I'll go back to High City with you. It's just a fever. It will go down in a day. It's no big deal." Seeing that she had come, Jinwan didn't say anything else and took a look at the time. "What time does the flight back to High City leave tomorrow?" 10:30 in the morning. "Then you can stay here for one night. We'll go back together tomorrow," Jinwan said and was about to call the hotel front desk to book another room. Seeing Jinwan's plan, Xiaoba hurriedly said, "Boss, you don't have to book a room for me. Your room is not small. Isn't there a sofa? I can sleep on the sofa." Jinwan was about to take the room's landline phone when she paused and looked back to see that Xiaoba had put her suitcase on the edge of the sofa, as if she was going to make do with it for the night. Xiaoba had lived in the same apartment with Jinwan in England and even slept on Jinwan's bed. They were very familiar with each other, so there was no need to treat her as an outsider. Jinwan glanced inconspicuously in the direction of the bathroom and picked up the room's landline phone. "This sofa is too small. It's not comfortable to sleep on. You flew here in a hurry today and have to fly back tomorrow. You should have a good sleep after traveling for 2 days in a row. I'll book a room for you on this floor. There's really no need. The sofa is big enough. It's a double sofa. I'm small and it's big enough to accommodate me," Xiaoba said as she pressed the sofa twice with her hand. "It's very comfortable. It's not much worse than a bed. Boss, you really don't have to book a room for me. I came here to take care of you and accompany you." Jinwan didn't seem to hear her. She had already made the call and booked a room closer to hers from the hotel front desk. She told Xiaoba that she would go downstairs with her ID card to check in a while, and then hung up the phone. Hearing that the room had been booked, Xiaoba had to sit on the sofa and look at Jinwan's back, sighing. "What a waste. It costs at least 3,000 or 4,000 yuan to stay in this hotel for a night. Why did you book a room for me? When I was with you in London, we could squeeze into a small apartment for the most difficult year and survive. Now you don't have to be so extravagant. I can even sleep on the floor, not to mention the sofa." Jinwan glanced at her with a smile. "How can I bear to let you sleep on the floor?" In the bathroom, Mo Jingshan, who had slept on the floor more than once not long ago, "There's a hard way to live in difficult times and there's a good way to live in good times. It's not like you can't afford to live in this kind of hotel with your monthly salary. Why are you talking to me about being thrifty?" Jinwan chuckled. Xiaoba rested her chin on the sofa with one hand and looked at her with a smile. "I see that you're too good to me, so I wanted to say that you don't have to be so good to me. I heard that you had a fever and specially came to take care of you, but you refused to let me stay with you. Tell me, is it because you're used to living alone in the past 2 years? You've started to dislike me the moment I came. Don't talk nonsense. It's getting late. The room is diagonally opposite. Someone will send the room card up in a moment. Go check in, take a shower, and go to bed early. You have to get up early tomorrow to go to the airport." Xiaoba clicked his tongue. "Boss, you're asking me to leave too hastily. I can't sleep now anyway. I'll just sleep if I go back to my room. I might as well chat with you here for a while. Jinwan, this damn girl." Chapter 610. Seeing Jinwan like this, it seemed that she was really tired. Xiaoba had to get up, pick up her small suitcase, make a goodbye gesture and turn to leave. However, as soon as she passed the bathroom door, she suddenly heard a cell phone ringing inside. Little 8 stopped in his tracks and glanced at the bathroom door in surprise. "Why is there?" Jinwan quickly walked over and stood between Xiaoba and the door before she reached out to push it open. "I put my cell phone inside and forgot to take it out." "Ah." Xiaoba was stunned. "Boss, your cell phone ringtone is different from this. I was bored a few days ago, so I changed my cell phone ringtone. Is that okay?" "Is that so?" Xiaoba felt that something was wrong, but from her angle she couldn't see what was going on in the bathroom. Besides, this was Jinwan's room, so she didn't have to care too much, but she felt that boss's expression was indescribably strange. Xiaoba blinked, looked at the bathroom door behind Jinwan and said, "Then I'm really going back to my room." "Hurry up." Jinwan reached out to push her to the door. The door opened and Xiaoba walked out with her suitcase. She turned back to say goodnight to Jinwan. Jinwan nodded, waved her hand and closed the door. She finally left and Jinwan breathed a sigh of relief at the door. Just now, for some reason, she had a strange feeling that she would be caught cheating at any time. Jinwan turned to open the door, but the doorbell suddenly rang again. She paused and turned to open the door. Xiaoba was still standing outside, but she was holding a stack of documents in her hand. "I forgot just now. You haven't been in High City these days, so I've brought the backlog of documents that you have to sign in person. Do you want to sign them tonight or on the plane tomorrow?" Jinwan glanced at the titles of the documents. They were all very urgent projects. If she didn't sign them, the implementation of the projects would be delayed. She raised her hand to take them. "I'll read them now. There are a few documents that I have to explain to you in detail. After that, I'll go back to my room." All right. Business was important. She would let her stay in the bathroom. 20 minutes later, Xiaoba gave Jinwan a brief account of the documents and things that needed to be explained. Seeing that Jinwan had understood almost everything, Xiaoba left. The room was completely quiet. Jinwan took 2 deep breaths, sat on the sofa, looked at the documents in her hand, and glanced at the door from time to time. After confirming that the person had really left, she put down the documents, stood up, and rushed into the bathroom. She opened the bathroom door and looked in. She thought that Mo Jingshan, who had never suffered such grievances before, would find a place to sit by the bathtub or stand inside to look at her expressionlessly. However, when she opened the door, she also turned on the light outside the bathroom. She raised her eyes and met the man's gaze in the full-length mirror. The man's back was tall and straight, and he did not look like he had suffered any grievances after being locked inside. His phone was muted and placed aside. His eyes weren't as cold and indifferent as they usually were in front of others, nor were they as warm and gentle as they usually were in front of her. There was only a hint of indifference, laziness and sexiness. The collar of his shirt was open. He was wearing a neat shirt and trousers, but now he looked very casual. Because he was shaving. "You." Before Jinwan could speak, she saw the man, with the help of the light in the bathroom, slowly clean the unfinished beard foam on both sides of his cheeks. This man was really calm at all times. From the outside, it seemed that there was no light in the bathroom, but it was not that there was no light in the bathroom. After all, the translucent frosted glass could still shine some light in the room. So he found something to do here and simply picked up the free razor and beard foam in the hotel bathroom to kill time. This kind of silent razor couldn't be heard outside. Jinwan looked at the man standing in front of the mirror and suddenly withdrew her gaze. "When are you leaving?" "I'll go back to High City with Xiaoba tomorrow. That girl is used to sticking to me and may run into my room to chat at any time at night. It's really inconvenient for you to stay here." He took a look at her, unhurriedly applied the beard foam on his cheeks and chin, and casually said before picking up the razor, "How shameful am I?" "Jinwan," she pursed her lips. "I just don't want to cause unnecessary misunderstanding. Xiaoba is naive and simple. She always thinks that there is no ill will between us and that we may remarry at any time. I don't want to be nosy and I don't want to explain too much, so you'd better leave as soon as possible." The man wasn't surprised. "I know what you're angry about and I know what you're concerned about. It's just that everything I'm doing is out of good intentions, so you can't bring yourself to do it. You're stuck in the middle, not knowing when to advance or retreat." Jinwan didn't speak but glanced at him. "Mo Jingshan, are we divorced or not?" The man glanced at her in the mirror and smiled. "Where did you find out about it? Why do you suddenly ask this question?" Jinwan stood at the door of the bathroom and said with a straight face, "I just thought that with your ability, a signed divorce agreement could definitely solve everything, but then I felt something was wrong." He glanced at her and shaved his face twice with the razor. He said lightly, "A woman's sixth sense is indeed accurate at times." "Jinwan, what did he mean?" "Did he mean?" Jinwan suddenly walked over and quickly to the man's side. "So, are we divorced or not?" "It was you who gave me the divorce agreement. After I signed it and sent it to you, you should sign it and go to settle the divorce. We don't have any unwelcome relationship or irrelevant ties at all, do we?" However, the man didn't speak. He unhurriedly took the razor and looked at the mirror methodically. Then he suddenly frowned and handed the razor to her. Jin Wan looked at him speechlessly. What are you doing? The gift from the hotel is not easy to use. The direction of the blade is very poor. If I shave it myself, there will probably be a few more cuts. Help me. As the man spoke, he turned around. At the same time, taking care of her height, he bent down slightly and tilted his face in her direction. Chapter 6:11. But why did he ask her to do it for him? Jin Wan ignored him and didn't take it. She just looked at him coldly. Mo Jingshan, didn't you hear what I asked you just now, or did you pretend not to hear it? The man raised his eyebrows. Help me clean these beard bubbles first. Don't you have your own hands? No matter how bad the razor in this high-class hotel is, it won't ruin your face. Do it yourself. Mo Jingshan sighed and snorted with a smile. Didn't you say you had another parent? You ungrateful brat? Jin Wan immediately rolled her eyes. If Mo Jingshan hadn't successfully persuaded her with this reason, she would have never seen him again in this life, separated by mountains and seas of people. She suddenly raised her hand angrily, took the razor from the man's hand, and then raised it to shave for him. She frowned and said, I don't know how to use this thing. Don't blame me if I ruin your face. Well, I won't blame you. The man looked at her calmly and gently. Because Jin Wan had to raise her hand to shave for him, the two of them were very close. He looked at her carefully, shaving his face, and his lips, which were covered by the white beard bubbles, gave a warm smile. Jin Wan didn't see the man smile, but when she helped him shave, she could feel the subtle changes on his face. She could also see the patience and gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her, and even the obvious satisfaction of being helped by her. She originally wanted to end the battle quickly, but because of the man's gaze she couldn't help but ease her strength, lest she accidentally scratched his face. After all, even if this man didn't rely on the company to make a living, he could still rely on his face to make a living. She couldn't really hurt him. Furthermore, to be honest, this man Mo Jingshan was really one of a kind. Before she married him at the age of 20, she didn't even know about the relationship between the two of them. She thought that she had seen a lot of handsome men. But since she met Mo Jingshan, she realized that those people she had met were not the best. Jin Wan's hands became lighter and slower. After much difficulty, she was finally done. She saw that the man was still standing in front of her with a faint smile. It was clear that he wanted her to help him clean up, as though she was repaying a favor. If they were really talking about repaying the debt of gratitude, she had been pressed on the bed by him for an entire night. Did that mean that she had already repaid him? Jin Wan looked at him with a fierce look. Seeing that he was still standing there, she simply pulled down a white towel next to her and wiped off the white minty shaving foam on the man's face. After wiping off the last bit of foam, Jin Wan said expressionlessly and anxiously, "Okay, now can you say?" Before she moved the towel away from the man's face and finished her words, the man suddenly bent down and kissed her. At the same time, he held her in his arms and held her tightly in his arms. Jin Wan hurriedly opened her mouth to bite him, but the man took the opportunity to deepen the kiss. In an instant, Jin Wan's mouth was filled with the minty flavor of shaving foam. The kiss came too suddenly and the man was too tall. Jin Wan raised her head and was kissed for a long time, unable to break free. Then she was pressed back a few steps by the man until her back was against the wall of the bathroom. The kiss did not separate and became deeper and heavier. She was kissed until she was almost suffocated, seeing stars, and her limbs were weak. At the same time, alarm bells rang in her heart. She hurriedly raised her hand and pushed against his chest hard. When he paused and lowered his eyes to look at her because he thought she was uncomfortable, she said angrily, "Mo Jingshan, let's finish talking. What do you want to talk about?" The man's dark eyes were locked on her. "Don't you already have the answer in your heart?" Jin Wan looked at him in disbelief. What answer could she have? Before seeing the divorce certificate or the divorce agreement, she would never believe it. It was absolutely impossible. When the man bent down and was about to kiss her again, Jin Wan raised her foot and stepped hard on his shoe. Even though the man was wearing high-end handmade Italian leather shoes, she was wearing thin high-heeled shoes, which she hadn't changed after returning to the room. The man paused but didn't move. He only pressed his forehead against hers. When she stepped on him harder and harder until it hurt, he only smiled and said hoarsely, "I said I would give you time. These few days in Jing City, I really couldn't control myself. I'm very sorry about what happened 2 nights ago. From now on, as long as I don't get your permission, I definitely won't do anything in?" Jin Wan glared at him. "Then what are you doing now? You are too seductive. I just want to kiss you." The man's eyes were sincere and his voice was low and gentle. Obviously he was coaxing her. There was a faint mint smell in the man's body, and now there was also a mint smell in the lingering smell of his beard. It smelled so good that Jean Wan's senses were stimulated. She leaned back against the wall. "You've kissed me. Let go of me." Seeing that she was about to explode again, Mo Jingshan raised his hand and stroked her head. He didn't kiss her again but whispered against her lips, "Must you leave tomorrow? I have nothing to do in Jing City. I've been away from High City for more than a week. I finished my work. Of course I should go back. If I don't leave, do you want me to stay here and be a fat piece of meat in your mouth?" The man laughed at her metaphor. "I'll just take a look. I won't eat it." "I don't believe you." Jean Wan pushed him hard and the man finally let go of her. He took a step back but the collar of his shirt was open because he had just shaved his face. He lowered his eyes to look at her. No matter how she looked at it, it seemed like he was deliberately seducing her. "You heard it just now. My plane is tomorrow morning, and I have a lot of company documents brought by Xiaoba to read tonight." When the man let go of her, Jean Wan turned to open the bathroom door and pointed to the stack of documents on the sofa outside. Mo Jingshan glanced at her as if saying, "I'm going to work and have no time to deal with you," and smiled. "All right, I'll go back and ask Xiaohu to drive you to the airport tomorrow morning." "No, we can call a car. Xiaoba and I can drive. It's better to rent a car than to bother your assistant." Jean Wan had been treating him as an outsider. Before returning to High City, she seemed to be thousands of feet away from him. Mo Jingshan didn't force her. He glanced at the thermometer she put on the table and turned to leave. As soon as he left the room, the door diagonally opposite suddenly opened. Chapter 6:12. Mo Jingshan walked past Xiaoba. Xiaoba stood stiffly in front of the door, not daring to move. She held a drink in her hand, afraid that she would accidentally spill it on Boss Missouri. She thought that Boss Missouri was going to ignore her and walk away, but the tall man suddenly stopped in front of her. Xiaoba's heart jumped. She recalled what happened in Jean Wan's room earlier and immediately chuckled in embarrassment. "Xiao Mo." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "Autumn has arrived in Jing City. The autumn wind is cold at night. Don't let her be exposed to the wind. Check her temperature at night to prevent her from having a recurring fever." And okay, I understand. To ease the awkwardness in the room, Xiaoba immediately nodded vigorously. "Tomo, don't worry. I'll definitely take good care of our boss Wan." She thought that Mo Jingshan would leave after saying this, but the man only put one hand in his trouser pocket. After a moment of silence he asked, "How did she get through the most difficult time in the past 3 years in London? Did no one help her?" Mo Jingshan indeed did not investigate Jean Wan's past 3 years. He arranged for someone he could trust to take her away and give her enough space to grow. Although he knew that growing up would inevitably be a lot of hardships and it would not be easy for her to achieve anything, he really did not investigate it. In fact, to him it was just a matter of a few words. But he was afraid that he would not be able to bear to see her suffer and would rather not ask about anything. He knew that her life was not as glorious as it seemed on the surface, and she must have suffered a lot. In his understanding, these were all processes that could forge Jean Wan's strong shell even harder. This was a path that she had to go through. Xiaoba faltered for a moment. There were some words that she did not know whether she should say or not. After thinking for a moment she said, "Actually, it's not a big deal. The period before Boss went to England was the most difficult for her, wasn't it? She even got through the most painful period. What else can't she get through?" Mo Jingshan glanced at Xiaoba. Xiaoba shifted her eyes away in fear. She did not have the courage to meet CEO Mo's gaze. After all, in her words just now, there was a hint of resentment towards him. However, she was an outsider and was in no position to say much. In fact, she was also wondering if she had said too much just now. After a long time she whispered again, "In the first year when Boss went to England, everything was fine because of Mr. Zan's help. But in the second year, when Mr. Zan suddenly stopped caring, she was met with jealousy and attacks from some companies. For more than half a year, Boss was so poor that she had to calculate how to spend even £50. All the liquid funds in the company were in a stagnant state. They couldn't be taken out, nor could they be used in any way. In short, it was quite difficult." Speaking of this, Xiaoba smiled again. But Boss was also very amazing. She didn't give up even when it was so difficult. At that time Mr. Vince flew to London and wanted to help her, but she refused. So, all Mr. Vince has been doing is introducing some foreign business to her, helping her promote some interpersonal relationships in the business world, and acting as a bridge between them. She endured everything else by herself. She worked day and night and even sold the house she bought when she first went to London. She squeezed into a small apartment that was not much better than a basement, eating instant noodles or cheap toast every day. In fact, the most difficult time wasn't too long. Boss wasn't completely without friends. She had many good relationships in London. Even if she didn't accept help from others, there were still people who admired her and would secretly help her with the company. Later, a project of the company was suddenly signed, and they received tens of millions of new financing. The company gradually began to step on the right track, and the performance kept rising. Life also became better. There were indeed difficult times, but as Boss said, those hardships were not worth mentioning compared to all the gains later. There was no need to talk about it often, so there were many things that I almost forgot. I only remember that Boss was very strong. Really, even if she wasn't a special woman, at least she was a woman that I admired. Xiaomo, if you really want to know the most difficult time for Boss, in my opinion, it shouldn't be when she was short of money, but when she just went to the UK. At that time, Boss seemed to be very confused. Every day when she woke up, she would look out of the window from time to time, or suddenly run over to open the door when she heard something. I knew that since she signed the divorce papers and went abroad, she must have let go of it. It was impossible for her to wait for someone. Maybe she didn't even know what she was doing. She just stared blankly at the empty door from time to time. This situation lasted for about 3 months, until there were too many things in the company and she got busier and busier. So, no matter what choice Boss makes, I think I will understand her and even respect her, because it's not that she hasn't fought for something or denied or refused something. But after 3 years, even I've gotten used to her temper. Even if she's a little sharp now, I still think she's right. I'm just blindly and unreasonably supporting Boss. COMO, do you understand what I mean? It wasn't until Mo Jingshan's figure disappeared that Xiaoba came out of her impassioned speech. She stood in front of the door in a daze for a long time before she realized that she had said too much. Boss clearly hated it when she talked about herself with others. Xiaoba immediately lowered her face, walked up to Jinwan's door and knocked on it. The weather in Jing City was indeed cold. After all, it was the end of September. Jinwan got up at 7 o'clock, took a shower and walked out of the room at 8 o'clock. When she came out, she wore a long dark gray windbreaker. It was not particularly thick and was suitable for this early autumn weather. The marks on her neck could not disappear so quickly. When she took a shower in the morning, she could still see the marks at a glance, so she had to wrap a scarf around her neck. When she closed the door, she carried her suitcase in one hand and sunglasses in the other, completely dressed for the airport. Xiaoba had already woken up. When she woke up, she suddenly received a call from the front desk and went downstairs to bring up 2 sets of breakfast. Chapter 6:13. Jinwan paused and looked at the things in Xiaoba's hands. Mo Jingshan asked someone to send them here? Yes, it's the assistant named Xiaohu. He said that these are the breakfasts CEO Mo ordered and asked him to send them here. He also said that CEO Mo told you to have a good breakfast before you leave. Don't starve because you're in a hurry. Jinwan glanced at the breakfast and said lightly, "Which one do you want to eat?" "I'm fine with anything. These are clearly your favorites. When you were in England, you craved these Chinese breakfasts several times, but you couldn't find the authentic ones. The Chinese food made by those foreigners was worse than the other. I didn't expect that CEO Mo even knew your favorite breakfast and bought them all," Xiaoba said and looked at Jinwan with bright eyes. "In fact, there's nothing urgent in High City. Would you like to stay in Beijing for a few more days before going back? President Mo really cares a lot about you. Haven't the plane tickets been booked? You can return them. There's no need to return. Let's go back. I happen to have something I need to check out." "All right." Xiaoba handed the breakfast to her. "Let's have breakfast before leaving? Don't waste CEO Mo's kindness." Jinwan took another look at the breakfast, turned and went straight into Xiaoba's room, intending to finish it here. Xiaoba eagerly opened the lid of the dumplings and handed the cutlery to her. Then, while eating her toast and milk, she said vaguely, "Boss, when CEO Mo came out of your room last night, I saw him." Jinwan paused with the spoon in her hand. Without speaking, she lowered her head and took a bite of the small wonton. "Then when I went to your room again, I saw that your mouth was a little swollen," Xiaoba said and shrank her neck as if afraid that Jinwan would hit her, but Jinwan just ate quietly and ignored her. Xiaoba glanced at her a few more times. She couldn't help but put down the things in her hands and whispered, "It's not that I want to talk too much, but I really can't help but ask. You and CEO Mo went on a business trip together, and he was still in your room so late at night. Although he left later, it's clear that the relationship between the two of you is no longer as simple as strangers after the divorce. Also, COMO treats you really well, although I don't understand why he chose to divorce you in the first place. After a pause, Xiaoba continued, "So, boss, what's your relationship with President Mo now?" Jin Wan blew at the hot soup in the bowl, took a sip and said unhurriedly, "Even now, I don't know what the relationship is. Maybe when I return to High City and find out the truth I'll know." Xiaoba was a little confused, but seeing that Jin Wan didn't want to talk about these things at all, she had to continue to eat the toast obediently. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon that day, Jin Wan and Xiaoba landed in High City. After returning to High City, the two of them rushed to the company. Jin Wan didn't idle for a moment. She solved some other things in the company that were delayed because of her absence and worked overtime overnight. It wasn't until the next morning that she had almost finished. Xiaoba had long been used to Jin Wan's working frequency. Every time she came back from a business trip for a few days, she would rush to deal with the urgent things at hand first, and only think of resting after finishing them. The next morning, Jin Wan closed her eyes in the office for a short rest, and Xiaoba had been busy since last night. In the afternoon, Xiaoba pushed the door open and came in. Seeing that Jin Wan was still taking a nap on the chair behind the desk, she didn't say anything but brought in Jin Wan's oversized suitcase. She opened it and wanted to help her sort it out and take out some office documents that were to be placed in the company. However, when she opened it and flipped through it, she saw a scroll on the side. She couldn't help but be surprised. Since it was in Jin Wan's suitcase and had been specially brought back to High City, it must be a famous painting. She didn't dare to touch it, but found some office documents and was about to get up. "Help me bring that painting over." Suddenly, Jin Wan, who had been sitting behind the desk with her eyes closed, said softly. Xiaoba turned to see that Jin Wan still hadn't opened her eyes, but it was clear that she had been awake when she came in. When she carefully picked up the painting and put it on the desk, Jin Wan opened her eyes, took a look at it and asked indifferently, "Is there anything else I need to deal with these 2 days?" "No, recently all the projects in the company have been carried out in an orderly manner. There's nothing important. Besides, you often travel on business and many things have been done by the vice president for you. There are just some documents that need your signature and decision-making. Now that you have signed them, there's nothing else." Xiaoba continued to help her pack her suitcase. At the same time he said, "Actually, boss, you can take advantage of the fact that you're not too busy now and take a good rest for a month or two. The new projects you signed in Jing City have already been communicated between the companies. The people below will be able to handle it. You don't have to do it yourself all the time." Jin Wan didn't speak. It was true that she hadn't taken a vacation for a long time. Jin Wan was still thinking about when to go back to the Ji family and hang the painting back in the study of the Ji family. Perhaps because of the father-daughter relationship between her and Ji Hongwen for many years, Ji Hongwen called her before it was time to get off work, saying that he knew she had come back from Jing City and asked her to go back to the Ji family for dinner in the evening. He specially asked Auntie Qin to cook a lot of her favorite dishes for her. There was no time like the present, so Jin Wan directly agreed. At about 5 o'clock in the evening, Jin Wan drove back to the Ji family. These years she didn't have much contact with her family. After returning to China, she only came back to have dinner with her father occasionally. She didn't intend to ask about her life experience and didn't feel anything in her heart. When she entered the door with the painting, Ji Hongwen glanced at the painting in her hand. "What is it?" "It's not a festival. Why did you bring back a painting when you came back to have dinner with me? Where did he get this painting from? Do you want me to appraise it for you?" "I saw a painting at an auction in Jing City. I thought you would like it, so I brought it back." Jin Wan said simply but didn't rush to open the painting. "After dinner I'll hang the painting in the study. You'll know it then." Seeing her meaningful look, Ji Hongwen stared at the painting in her hand for a long time, thought about it, didn't say much and ordered someone to prepare dinner. Chapter 6:14. What partner? Back then, your Auntie Shin took advantage of the fact that I was drunk and had sex with me. Later I also thought the same as you. I needed someone by my side, so I married her. In the end, look at what happened. Ji Hongwen poured wine into his glass and said, "A few days ago when you were not here, Shin Haru came back to make a scene several times. She said that after working hard for the Ji family for so many years, she was driven out without taking a penny with her. She even said that she would file a lawsuit. If the Ji family doesn't give her hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, she won't give up." Jin Wan's face turned cold. With the slow-acting poison she gave you, I can send the drug test records to the court. It'll be enough to make her suffer. How dare she file a lawsuit? Doesn't Sheng Yihan care about her now? I don't know. The power of the Sheng family is in Sheng Yihan's hands. Although he hasn't severed his mother-son relationship with your Auntie Shin, he doesn't care about family affection. He probably doesn't communicate much with his son. Shin Haru is clearly living a good life now, but she still comes to the Ji family to make trouble. She kept clamoring to see me and talk to me face to face. I ignored her and asked the security guards to drive her away. Speaking of this, Ji Hongwen let out a long sigh. I don't know why I brought such a woman into the family. How great is it now? When I miss the kids, I just need to give you a call and you can come back. When I want to be free, no one can control me and I can drink whenever I want. In the past, I didn't even dare to put my arms around a woman's waist when I went out to socialize. Now, at least my life in the middle and late years is more comfortable. Jin Wan pursed her lips, but then she thought that Ji Hongwen was only in his 50s. It was normal for him to live a better life. Even if there weren't many people in the Ji family, she still had to live a better life. Besides, Ji Hongwen was the pillar of the Ji corporation. She had so many social engagements now, not to mention an old fox in the business circle like him. His life outside was probably much better than hers. Every day she worried that Ji Hongwen would be lonely at home. Now that she thought about it, she really thought too much. He helped raise someone else's daughter for so many years without any regrets. He couldn't live so hard all the time. He should enjoy life. After dinner, Jin Wan went straight to the study. When he hung Zhang Daqian's peach blossom painting back to its original position, he stood in front of the painting and looked at it for a long time until the door to the study opened and Ji Hongwen walked in. When he saw the painting, his eyes paused for a moment before he suddenly turned back to look at it again. This is the painting you brought back from Jing City? Ji Hongwen asked as he walked over. His eyes were fixed on the painting. Clearly he was more touched than Jin Wan. Yes, after all, I saw it at home when I was young. At that time, my mother often carried me back and forth in your study. This is the painting that left the deepest impression on me. When I saw it in Beijing, I wanted to take it back and hang it here. I reluctantly let go of this painting in the past, and I've regretted it for many years. I didn't expect to be able to hang it here in my lifetime. Ji Hongwen looked at it for a while, then smiled and said, "Girl, this thing isn't cheap now, is it?" "Not bad," Jin Wan said meaningfully. Anyway, she didn't pay for this painting. Seeing that Ji Hongwen had been looking at the paintings, she guessed that he had something on his mind because of these paintings. She stayed in the study for a while and then went out. She didn't plan to stay at the Ji family tonight and wanted to go back to Yuehu Bay to rest for a few days. Before leaving, Jin Wan chatted with Andy Chin in the living room downstairs for a while. When she was about to leave, Ji Hongwen came downstairs. Seeing Jin Wan hadn't left, he said in a low voice, "Wan Wan, come up. Dad wants to talk to you about something." Jin Wan paused and looked up at him. Ji Hongwen turned around and went up first. Vaguely, Jin Wan felt that what Ji Hongwen was going to talk to her about was not a trivial matter, so she thought about it and followed him upstairs. When she returned to the study, Ji Hongwen saw that she had closed the door, looked back at her and said, "In fact, you have always wanted to know about your mother, but because I never mentioned it, you never mentioned it. But today, seeing this painting you brought back, I realized that although you were very young when your mother left, it doesn't mean that you don't care about the relationship between mother and daughter, and it doesn't mean that you really don't want to know where your roots are." Jin Wan looked at him calmly. "Dad, it's true that this painting reminds me of my childhood, so I want to hang it in the original place. I don't have any other thoughts." "Really?" Ji Hongwen looked at her, smiled meaningfully and sighed with a smile. "I don't want to mention your family background. After all, it's not a happy past for me, your mother, and that person, and there are too many grudges between us. I don't want to mention it. Do you really want to be kept in the dark for the rest of your life? If this is your choice, of course I won't say more, and I don't want to say more." Jin Wan didn't speak again. Ji Hongwen understood her silence and sighed. "During this period of time, I've also heard some news. You've had some dealings with the Xiao family. With your acuity, I'm sure you'll be able to detect some things even if I don't say it." There was something that seemed to be hidden under such a thin layer of paper. Jin Wan looked calm, but in her heart, countless waves were surging. "The Xiao family? I really didn't want to mention it, but I think the Xiao family doesn't want to keep you outside after knowing the truth. Since some things can't be hidden, I might as well tell you from the beginning to the end," Ji Hongwen said and put a piece of paper with an address on the table. "Go back and have a look at this place when you have time." Jin Wan looked at the address on the paper and her eyes couldn't help but deepen. After leaving the Ji family, Jinwan went straight back to Yuehu Bay. Her hair had grown a lot longer recently, and it was now more than 10 centimeters below her shoulders. After showering, she walked out of the bathroom while drying her hair. She glanced at the phone on the coffee table and the note with the address written on it. After drying her hair, she put down the hairdryer, sat on the sofa, picked up the note and read it for a while. Thinking that she really had nothing to do recently, she thought it would be good to go to this place during her vacation. She picked up her cell phone and was about to send a message to the company to explain something and say that she was going to take a few days off. However, when she opened WeChat, she saw that Mo Jingshan's profile picture was still in the row of messages. The last message was from that night when he asked her what flavor of noodles she wanted to eat, and she said anything. The man's WeChat profile picture was still her photo, and his name was still blank. He didn't even post a message on WeChat Moments. Chapter 6:15. Ji City. The next day Jinwan arrived here. Because this was the city her grandmother lived in, Jinwan wasn't familiar with her grandmother. She only vaguely remembered that when she was young, her grandmother brought her other daughters and children to stay in High City for a few days during the spring festival. Back then she was still young and didn't know what happened. She only remembered that they parted on bad terms, and her mother was in a particularly bad mood at that time. The reason why Ji Hongwen asked her to come to Ji City to visit her grandmother, whom she hadn't contacted for many years, was because her grandmother suddenly had a cerebral hemorrhage 2 months ago and almost died. Thankfully, she was sent to the hospital in time and met a professional doctor who saved her from the gates of hell. Now she was recuperating at home, but she wasn't as healthy as before. Right now she had to go out in a wheelchair every day or lay in bed. Ji Hongwen said that her grandmother was already in her 70s. Although a cerebral hemorrhage didn't take her life, she probably wouldn't live for long. 2 months ago they had called the Ji family to say that they wanted to visit Jinwan and Ji Mengran. They had only seen them a few times in their lives and were afraid that they wouldn't even be able to see them for the last time. However, Ji Mengran completely ignored these so-called poor relatives. She couldn't even be bothered to return to the Ji family. Why would she come to a small place like Ji City to visit her dying grandmother? Ji City was indeed very small. There was no airport. She had to transfer from the airport to take a train to get here. As soon as she stepped out of the train station, she found that there were always gazes on her. At first, she thought that her 2 suitcases were too large and attracted the attention of passers-by. However, when she took a taxi, the driver explained to her, "Little beauty, you're dressed quite well. I can tell it's not cheap just by looking at it. Aren't you afraid of being robbed in such a remote place?" Jinwan was dressed in a low-key manner. She knew that Ji City was a small city, and it would take a long drive to get to her grandmother's house. It was a remote place, so she only wore casual clothes. She didn't even have any brands on her, nor did she bring any jewelry. The only things in these 2 suitcases were the small gifts she had bought at the airport before boarding the plane. She planned to give them when she met her grandmother and the rest of her family. Even such a simple gift could tell that it wasn't cheap. Was there something wrong with her clothes, or did she not look like someone who had lived in this city? After nearly 2 hours of rushing, Jinwan finally arrived at her so-called grandmother's home. Just as she was about to knock, the door in front of her opened. "Oh, there are beautiful clothes everywhere. Why do you have to wear this one? If you like it, ask Mom to buy you another one." "Mine won't." "Huh? Who are you?" A girl dressed fashionably in this city looked at Jinwan in surprise, who was carrying 2 large suitcases. She stared at Jinwan's face in astonishment and looked back at her younger sister who came out behind her. The 2 girls stood in front of the door and stared at Jinwan at the same time as if they had seen something rare. "Damn, she looks just like the woman in the photo. She looks just like that dead aunt." Jinwan. Hearing this, she guessed that the 2 in front of her should be the 2 children of her grandmother's other daughter. In other words, they were her cousins. Before coming here, Jinwan had inquired about her grandmother's situation. She had asked Ji Hongwen, Auntie Qin and some of the old servants in the Ji family. She knew that her mother's family was poor when she was young. She was born in a small city like Ji City and had to rely on scholarships and recommendation to go to college in the United States. It was the various people and things she met after arriving in the United States that changed her life. Her mother married into a wealthy family like the Ji family, which was equivalent to flying up the branch. However, Jinwan didn't know why she didn't contact her family. Jinwan didn't know. She only learned from Auntie Qin that her mother's relationship with her family wasn't particularly good. Her mother's older sister was especially arrogant and domineering. She heard that when they visited the Ji family, they were directly chased out. After so many years, they didn't contact each other again. The two of you are always bickering and fighting over a new dress. You're already in your 20s. Do you think your little girl's fighting over sweets or something? A woman's dissatisfied voice came from the door. After a while, a woman who appeared to be in her 50s walked out. When she saw Jinwan, she looked her up and down strangely. She stared at her face for a moment and then looked at her clothes. She seemed to have recalled something, but her tone was unfamiliar and rude. You're from High City's G family? Jinwan nodded. Hello. The woman in her 50s raised her brows. Are you Ji Mingran or Jinwan? Jinwan. Wow. Before the middle-aged woman could speak, the two girls suddenly surrounded her. Cousin, hello. I'm Song Sisi and this is my younger sister, Song Kiki. I've long heard grandmother mention you. Are you really from High City? Aren't there many tall buildings in High City? I heard that trains can even travel in the sky. Jinwan. She really wanted to say that it wasn't trains in the sky but light rail. It was only on the flyovers and higher tracks in High City. However, Jinwan looked at these two cousins who were not much younger than her but appeared so innocent. She did not say much and only smiled and greeted them. The two little cousins first pulled Jinwan into the door and then helped to carry the suitcase in Jinwan's hand. Anyway, the suitcase was full of gifts for them, so Jinwan just let them take it. When she turned to look at the middle-aged woman inside, the woman just glanced at her indifferently and then called back, "Old lady, Jinwan is here." Then she saw an old woman in her 70s or 80s come out of the door in a wheelchair. She looked surprised, and then the middle-aged woman next to her complained, "Why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming back? Are you Nwan?" The old woman looked at Jinwan with emotion. Jinwan smiled and nodded. "Hello, are you grandmother?" The old woman nodded. Jinwan did not say more. Anyway, she had already called them grandmother. She heard that their relationship with her mother was not particularly good, so there was no need for her to be too friendly. If Ji Hongwen hadn't specifically said that she might not even be able to see her for the last time, she might not have come to Ji City. However, since she was already here, she might as well take things as they came. Anyway, it was a rare vacation, so there was nothing wrong with coming to this kind of small town to experience life. At this time, the middle-aged woman and the old woman exchanged a few more words. After chatting for a while, Jinwan was invited into the door, but it was mostly polite greetings. Jinwan did not think that there would be any touching family waiting for her here. Chapter 6:16. Mom, my sister can easily buy a new dress when she goes shopping. I haven't bought any clothes for 2 months. Give me 200 yuan. I want to buy some too. Song Kiki acted as though she did not see Jinwan enter and suddenly spoke up after everyone entered the room. Jinwan's eyes lit up. You guys chat. I'll put the luggage down first. Jinwan looked around and saw that the house was quite large. There were also quite a number of rooms. She asked, "Where's my mother's room?" Her grandmother glanced at her and did not speak. The middle-aged woman's expression also faltered. Song Sisi and Song Kik's expressions suddenly appeared nervous. There's no rush. It's just 2 suitcases. How many things can there be? Let's put them down first. This house is a little messy. Your mother's room has been empty for so many years. It's quite dirty inside. Sisi, Kiki helped tidy it up before letting Jinwan move in. Can't we tidy it up anytime? Song Sisi stepped forward and held onto Jinwan's arm affectionately. Cousin, this is your first time back. Did you bring any gifts for us? Usually, Song Sisi would not casually call someone older sister. However, she had heard that Jinwan came from a very wealthy place and that her family was also very wealthy. Even though she did not know of her current situation, she was certain that she was still a wealthy person. Thus, she approached to curry favor with her. Jinwan noticed that their gazes had shifted to the innermost room. She guessed that it was most likely that room. However, she pretended that nothing was out of the ordinary. She pointed to the suitcases they had thrown on the ground with a smile. Yes, this pink suitcase is filled with gifts. Open it up and divide it among yourselves. As she spoke, she picked up a silver suitcase filled with her own things and turned to enter that room. The moment her 2 cousins heard that there was a gift, they did not stop her. Her grandmother and the middle-aged woman did not have time to stop her. Jinwan stepped forward to open the door. She saw that although the bedsheets and wardrobe looked brand new, the floor and bed looked like a junkyard. The floor was covered with snacks and empty beverage bottles as well as sunflower seed shells. The originally clean blanket on the bed had been dragged to the floor and was covered with dust. Several drawers were open, revealing the things and photos her mother used when she was young. There were even some fruit juices and other things spilled on them. As it was still hot in G City during the day, there were actually flies flying around her mother's yellowed photos. There were some old clothes in the wardrobe. They appeared to have been worn by her mother decades ago. Although they were not thrown away, they were wrinkled and not very clean. It was clear that someone had taken them out, dirted them, and then stuffed them into the wardrobe. Jinwan watched this scene. When she turned back, she saw that Song Cici and Song Kiki were still excitedly studying the password on the suitcase. After a long time they could not open it. Her grandmother's gaze was slightly embarrassed. The middle-aged woman, who Jinwan should be addressing as aunt, raised her hand to touch her ear. Jinwan immediately noticed the pair of gold earrings on her ears. It seemed like she had worn them for a long time. She remembered that when they visited the Ji family when they were young, they seemed to have taken away a lot of things from her mother's room. Back then Jinwan was still young and had stood by the side to watch. She did not know what they were doing. She only heard her aunt say as she tried on her mother's jewelry, "Rich madams from wealthy families are really different. Everything in the jewelry box is not cheap. Those diamonds and pearls aren't even worth their value. These gold and silver jewelry can still be worth some money." The so-called aunt could tell what Jinwan was thinking. She pointed to the room and said, "Hey, Cici and Kiki usually don't stay here. However, whenever the two sisters quarrel, they don't stay together. Every time Kiki is born, she would run over to her aunt's room to stay. That's why I changed the wardrobe and bed, but your mother's things are still inside. We haven't touched them." Hearing this, Song Kiki turned to see that Jinwan's expression was not right. She rushed to stand up. "Cousin, I'll clean it up in a while. I promise I'll clean it up. Is there no other room in the house? Can't I stay in another room when I'm angry?" Jinwan asked expressionlessly. The other rooms are all hard beds. It's not comfortable to stay in. Furthermore, the heater isn't good when the weather is cold. Andy's room has the best heater." Song Kiki pouted, "Cousin, I don't have any other place to sleep. Don't be so petty." The problem was that Jinwan came here for her mother. What should she think when she saw such a scene? Could it be that she couldn't stay in her mother's room? "Cousin, don't be angry. I'll pack up my things right now." Song Kiki leaned forward again. However, even after saying this twice, she did not seem to have any intention of packing up. Instead, she tugged on Jinwan's arm to ask, "Cousin, why can't you unlock the password for your luggage?" Jinwan had rushed here from High City. She had traveled by plane, train and taxi for an entire day. She was tired and could not be bothered to fuss over it. She gave them the 4-digit password and then said, "Forget it. I'll pack up tomorrow. I'll stay in another room today." The moment she finished speaking, her two cousins, grandmother and big aunt all revealed satisfied expressions. Jinwan carried her luggage and turned to find a room. Song Cici and Song Kiki had already opened up their luggage and cried out in surprise. At this moment, Song Cici suddenly stood up to help Jinwan carry her luggage. She snatched it over and said, "Cousin, you're really rich. Are all these gifts for us? What are you carrying here? The clothes you're wearing are really beautiful. Are there any other beautiful clothes in this silver luggage?" Hearing this, Jinwan quickly took the luggage back. "These are all my personal clothes. There aren't any new clothes. Aren't there many gifts in the pink luggage? You can split them however you like." Seeing that Jinwan seemed to treasure this silver luggage, the two sisters came over. After Jinwan entered the room, they fought to open her luggage. The password for both of Jinwan's luggage was the same. After opening it, the pajamas, skirts and other casual clothes that she felt comfortable in were all taken out by the two sisters. They looked at them in the mirror and fought to try them on. Jinwan pursed her lips in silence as she watched them try on the clothes. Fine, she couldn't wear these clothes anymore. After the two sisters searched through most of the clothes in her suitcase and left in all kinds of high-end and beautiful clothes, Jinwan was finally able to rest quietly for a while. It was no wonder Song Kiki was unwilling to stay in this room. The windows were all broken. Thankfully, G City's autumn weather was not too cold. However, it was inevitable that flies and mosquitoes would fly in. Chapter 617. Jing City. Mo Jingshan had just left a meeting when he received a call from Shinmu. COMO, after returning to High City, Miss Ji didn't rush to the Civil Affairs Bureau to check her marriage records. For some reason she suddenly went to G City. Mo Jingshan paused in his steps and glanced at the business partners who were greeting him. He calmly asked, "G City?" "That's right. I've never heard of MN Group having any business dealings with G City. Besides, she went there alone. We don't have anyone there and the transportation isn't convenient. Right now, I don't know the situation. The only thing I know is that Miss G bought a lot of gifts before boarding the plane. It seems like she has some friends or relatives there. Mo Jingshan paused for several seconds before continuing forward. After a moment of silence, he calmly said, her mother's household registration was in G City. So, is Miss G investigating her own background? But isn't it inappropriate for her to go back alone? Besides, the G family doesn't seem to have much contact with her mother's family. Some so-called relatives who haven't been in contact with each other for years, once they become suspicious, it's different from the bloodless killings in the business circle. A remote and desolate place produces unruly people. With her current temper, it's indeed inappropriate for her to be alone. Then should we send someone over? Mo Jingshan glanced out the window of the conference hall and toward the south of G City. He softly and indifferently said, wait for me to return. This bed was not just a little hard. Jean Wan originally wanted to rest in her room for the afternoon, but she was too tired from running around. Furthermore, when she recalled that this was where her mother had grown up, she slightly let down her guard and unknowingly fell asleep. It was only when she heard the sounds of tables being moved and the smell of cooking wafting in that she recalled where she was in her dreams. It was most likely dinner time. Jean Wan turned over and planned to sleep for a few more minutes. All of a sudden she felt a small force tugging something out of her hands. Jean Wan subconsciously tightened her grip, but the other party seemed to be stubbornly trying to tug it out. Jean Wan impatiently opened her eyes and was caught off guard to see Song Sisi standing by her bedside. She was currently holding onto this year's latest model phone. Unexpectedly, Jean Wan, who had been sleeping, suddenly woke up. Song Sisi was a little embarrassed. She quickly withdrew her hand and rubbed it on her skirt as if nothing had happened. Jean Wan looked down and saw that there were many ugly fingerprints on her phone screen. Before she fell asleep, she was looking at her phone. She fell asleep unknowingly and forgot to put her phone away. Fortunately, she had been holding it in her hand. If she had left it at the side, it would have been taken away by the two sisters. The price did not matter. None of the clothes that the two sisters had taken from her suitcase were cheap. Any of the pajamas cost more than 4 digits. However, there was a lot of information on the phone and computer, as well as the contact list of work contacts. This was the bottom line. Cousin, you're awake? Song Sisi purposely asked. Her gaze sneaked several glances at Jean Wan's phone. That was the latest model of this year's phone. It seemed to have just been released and was rumored to cost nearly 10,000 yuan. And Jean Wan calmly stood up, her expression indifferent. Mom and Grandma asked me to wake you up for dinner. All right. Jean Wan glanced at the door. It seemed like she had to think of a way to lock the door if she stayed here for the next 2 days. Otherwise, she would not be able to sleep well. Cousin, do you usually sleep in the afternoon? Is it like being a rich young lady in a rich family, where you don't have to do any work and only have to eat, sleep, and buy things every day? I heard that Haicheng's Ji family is one of the 4 largest families in Haicheng. They have so much money that they can't even finish spending it. A young lady from such a wealthy family would have at least hundreds of thousands of yuan in pocket money every month or even more. Cousin, that phone of yours is really nice. It's the latest model, isn't it? You shouldn't have only bought one, right? Did you buy a few more to bring back? Jean Wan adjusted her clothes while listening to Song Sisi's barrage of questions. Jean Wan had just woken up and did not have the patience to talk to this little girl, who was clearly in her 20s but pretended to be innocent. However, since these were her mother's last relatives in this world, she patiently and expressionlessly gave a few perfunctory replies and gave a short answer. Outside, her aunt urged her to eat. Jean Wan stood up and ignored her. Cousin, you really didn't buy a few more phones? That phone of yours is already worth 3 to 4 months of someone else's salary. I've only seen it in advertisements. Song Sisi dilly-dallied and was unwilling to leave. It was as though she did not want to stop until Jean Wan agreed to give her the phone. After all, if she were to leave, Song Kiki would most likely fight with her for it. Thus, she wanted to make things clear in this room. Seeing that Jean Wan was completely ignoring her, Song Sisi chased after her to ask, Cousin, did you buy everything yourself? Do you have a boyfriend? Could the phone have been given to you by your boyfriend? Jean Wan acted as though she did not hear anything. She had already pushed open the door and left. Song Sisi immediately pursed her lips unhappily and quickly followed after her. Jean Wan could not be bothered to reply. She continued probing. This Song Sisi would definitely think of ways to get information out of her and even more so, take the phone for herself. These so-called family members of her mother's family had truly not contacted each other for many years. In their minds, Jinwan was merely the young lady of the Ji family and was still relying on the Ji family to live. Thus, the words that came out of their mouths were all sour, talking about how she was a young lady from a wealthy family. They did not understand anything else about Jinwan's family. At the dining table, her grandmother's hands trembled the entire time as she ate. However, she was stubborn and refused to let anyone feed her. As a result, her clothes were covered in soup stains. This family was probably used to it and did not say anything. Her aunt placed the last dish on the table. Song Kiki was already seated at the table, waiting for the meal to start. She had already changed into a French brand dress that she had previously taken from Jinwan. Her expression was filled with delight. Song Sisi also followed over. After the family sat down, they began eating with their own thoughts. Only her grandmother would occasionally stare at Jinwan's face because she looked too much like her mother when she was young. Jinwan, you're not young anymore. You should be in your 20s, right? Her aunt sat down and glanced at Jinwan. Seeing that she was not wearing any jewelry, nor did she have any engagement rings, she immediately raised her brows. Oh, that's right. 24. Here, those who are over 25 and still haven't married are considered old ladies. You're not married yet? Don't you have a man? Chapter 6:18. Why are you looking at me? Seeing Jinwan's lukewarm gaze, her aunt could tell that Jinwan's temper was similar to her mother's. Although she appeared calm on the surface, she actually had a temper in her bones. She immediately snorted. I'm just being concerned. After all, for people like you who come from wealthy families, even if no one really likes you for the sake of money and marriage, you'll most likely be able to get married. It's just that I don't know what kind of person you'll end up marrying. Speaking up to this point, first aunt sighed again. I've heard that in the marriages between rich and powerful families, many young ladies are married to old men with big bellies and bald heads. When I think about how you might live such a life in the future, I also feel sorry for your mother. And you must have watched too many bitter TV dramas. Usually, only these kinds of inferior TV dramas would produce such plots of people hating the rich. The daughters of wealthy families all have miserable marriages, and the descendants of wealthy families never have good endings. After all, such plots are mostly used to satisfy the mentality of ordinary people at the bottom of society. That's why there's no lack of brainwashed directors who produce such things and broadcast them to brainwash people. Jinwan calmly ate as she calmly said, but in reality, I believe that when Aunt visited the Ji family many years ago, you should have seen it before. Her aunt's expression immediately froze because of Jinwan's clear praise and hidden criticism. Back then, when they visited the Ji family, they had naturally seen a true wealthy family. Although it was not as exaggerated as those portrayed in TV dramas, it was truly a wealthy family. The people living in that kind of place, regardless of whether it was money, background, or even character, they could not compare to them. Indeed, there were no rotten old men. At that time, they had also met some of the relatives and friends who interacted with the Ji family. Those people's children were all well educated. Aside from some who were spoiled and willful, most of them were well educated. They were not people ordinary people could compare to. Her aunt held her shoulders, suppressing her anger with a smile. That's true. Marrying a rotten old man is indeed too unrealistic. After all, your looks are still passable. At the very least, you'll be able to marry a rich family's playboy. Jinwan didn't answer. Anyway, no matter what she said, this aunt could find something to comfort her own unbalanced heart. Although this was a small city, fortunately, Jinwan was used to these home-cooked meals. Except for her grandmother who couldn't eat well because of her health, the tableware was clean. While eating, Jinwan wanted to take away her mother's things as soon as possible and leave as soon as possible. There was no need to stay here for too long. At this moment, her grandmother spoke up. Jinwan, if you're free in the future, come back to Ji City more often. If you need anything, we can help you. Hearing her grandmother's words, Jinwan just listened. What could she possibly need their help with? First aunt suddenly chimed in. Cece and Kiki will be graduating from university in 2 years. By then, they'll definitely need to spend a lot of money to find a job. If you're well off, why don't you leave some money for them this time? Consider it as helping your 2 cousins. Mom, after we graduate, we'll need to change into more presentable clothes and necessities when we find a job or something, Song Cece interjected. That's right, Jinwan. In any case, you don't lack money. The gifts you bought this time shouldn't be cheap. There's no need to be so wasteful. Why don't you just give them cash? Speaking up to hear, her aunt paused. It's not much. For your two cousins, 100,000 yuan each is enough. Leave us 200,000 before you leave. What do you think? If there's anything we need in the future, we'll call you again. The moment Song Cici and Song Kiki heard 200,000 yuan, their eyes lit up. They exchanged glances and gently pushed each other. The two of them joked around for a while, clearly secretly delighted. Her grandmother nodded. That's right. After all, we're the only relatives left in your mother. Your aunt isn't an outsider either. We should help each other out. Jinwan, you've been living in a big city and have seen many people. If you meet any men with good family backgrounds, don't forget to introduce them to Cici and Kiki. The people cousin knows must all be rich people. Song Kiki placed her bowl and chopsticks down. By the way, I didn't dare to touch them earlier. I saw an especially expensive laptop in cousin's luggage. Sister will be lacking a laptop when we're staying at school, right? The moment Song Kiki finished speaking, everyone's gaze focused on Jinwan. Jinwan's gaze was indifferent. She did not meet their gazes at all. She naturally curved her lips and smiled mildly. I came all the way to G City and even brought my laptop with me. There must be something important that I need to do. There's work information inside and it's all quite important. The moment she heard these words, Song Kiki, who was originally excited that she would agree to it, immediately fell. Her aunt glanced at her again. You have a job? Jinwan also glanced at her. You know that I'm not young anymore. Is it strange to have a job? Not only did she have a job, it was a job worth tens of billions. However, she could not say it here. Otherwise, this family might think of a way to drink her blood. 200,000 yuan? Haha, if her mother did not intend to help this so-called family back then, Jinwan would now understand why her mother was not close to her family. Since her mother had never helped them, there was no way she would satisfy their request of 200,000 yuan. Let alone 200,000 yuan, she would not even give them 20,000 yuan. After all, if this matter started, they would ask for money endlessly in the future. Did these people treat her as an ATM? Even if she gave 200,000 yuan to a beggar, they would not stay here. Her aunt wanted to say something, and her two cousins also wanted to say something. However, Jinwan did not respond at all and focused on eating. The atmosphere at the dining table became slightly awkward. Of course, the one feeling awkward was not Jinwan, but the others who clearly wanted to speak but were ignored time and time again. In the end, the meal was tasteless. Jinwan, on the other hand, was full. She stood up and went to her mother's room. She saw that it was still as messy as before. Song Kiki said that she would tidy it up, but in reality she had no intention of giving up the room. How could she possibly tidy it up? Seeing that Jinwan had entered the room to tidy up and even brought out her mother's yellowed photos, Song Kiki gave Song Cici a look. The two sisters stood up and left. Chapter 619. The two sisters held onto their phones and looked at the report on Jinwan's ranking on Forbes this year. However, they could only see a photo from an interview. The person smiling calmly in the photo did look similar to Jinwan, but the report was written in English. Even the name was the English name Jinwan used when she was in London. They could not understand what was written and could only stare at the photo for a long time. Song Kiki said, "In the afternoon, I didn't know which website I clicked on, but a page suddenly popped up and saw this small photo hanging in the corner. When I clicked on it, I didn't expect it to be such a large report. Do you think the person in this photo is Jinwan?" Song Cici stared at it for a long time. She felt that although the photos looked very similar, any random photo had been photoshopped. It was too bright and she could only make out about 70 to 80% of their faces. Furthermore, all the beauties looked the same. Perhaps it was just that they looked similar. She pointed to the English words on the photo. "Although I don't know much about the others, you should at least know about London's Forbes ranking, right? Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to school for so many years." Looking at these words, I think it's an interview with a female entrepreneur in London. Why would a rich young lady like Jinwan run to London instead of enjoying her life in High City? Isn't she always in High City? She said earlier that she has a job, so the person in this photo can't be her. The two's conversation shifted from the photo to Jinwan, and then to the clothes. Finally, they quickly discussed how they would spend the 200,000 yuan. The two were rocking back and forth in laughter when the door opened. Jinwan walked out and looked at the two sisters who had been chatting in the yard. She said calmly and mildly, "The room is ready. Can I change to another room?" Song Kiki was stunned. She subconsciously looked toward Song Cici. Song Cici stepped forward. "Cousin, didn't you say you would stay in another room tonight? Why are you suddenly changing rooms?" I was too tired when I arrived in the afternoon and went to rest. Didn't Kiki say she was going to tidy up? I saw that she didn't have time to tidy up, so I cleaned up after dinner. You can change now. Jinwan smiled lightly. The sooner you change, the easier it'll be. You won't have to go through all that trouble tomorrow. Song Cici and Song Kiki, but my things are still here, Jinwan interrupted Song Kik's words. I've tidied everything up for you. There are only a few clothes on the bed as well as your blanket, phone charger and the like. I've helped you fold them neatly. In a while you can bring them back to Cici's room or to another room. After all, they used to be my mother's room. Since I'm back, it's only right for me to stay there. But it's already so late and I'm still hugging my blanket and changing rooms. That's too. It's okay. Let Cici help you. It'll be quick. Then where should I sleep? Cici's room is cramped. After we grew up, we rarely stayed together. After all, the bed wasn't that big. Ask your mother to arrange another room for you. You can't always sleep in my mother's room, right? Jinwan was still smiling, but she slowed down the speed at which she said, my mother. The two sisters heard her deliberate reminder and did not say anything else. Cousin, I see that your luggage is also in another room today. Kiki is used to sleeping in little aunt's room, so it's better to let Kiki stay there. You've only been back for a few days, so there's no need to change rooms. Song Cici said. No. Jinwan straightforwardly rejected. I need time to tidy up my mother's belongings. Kiki will always be staying there, and it won't be convenient for me to tidy up. What if she loses a phone charger and asks me to compensate for her phone? Ha, cousin, you really know how to joke. Why would I ask you to compensate for my phone? Song Kiki and Song Cici exchanged glances. Their expressions were slightly awkward. Actually, they had thought of this method before. Jinwan could not even be bothered to continue arguing with them. She turned around and brought her luggage into her mother's room. Seeing that they were relatives, Jinwan could still tolerate them a little. However, now that she saw how vile this family was, she naturally could not take another step back. Seeing that she was so insistent, Song Kiki could only leave. However, Song Cici held her back and threw an unhappy expression at Jinwan. She then turned around and left. Jinwan ignored her. After entering the room, she made the bed again. Thankfully, there were new blankets and pillows in the cabinet. Although she did not know how long they had been in the cabinet, they still looked relatively clean. Previously, Song Kiki had most likely treated this room as a game room. Aside from Song Kiki staying here, it was likely that she had played here with her classmates and friends. Every time Jinwan swept the floor, she would find some things under the cabinets. There were even some old playing cards. Although her mother had passed away many years ago, there were so many rooms that could have been used. Yet they had to choose this room. She did not know what intentions they had. It was clear that they did not have the slightest bit of respect for their deceased aunt. Thankfully, this room was separate. Aside from a small door inside, there was also a main door that led to the courtyard. Jinwan directly locked the small door from the inside. She planned to enter and leave through the main door for the next 2 days. However, because Jinwan had forcefully changed rooms and cleaned up her mother's things one by one, Jinwan was even more disliked in the eyes of this family. She did not know what her aunt had secretly said to her grandmother. The next morning, when her grandmother saw that Jinwan had just woken up and was about to get some water to wash up, her gaze was not as happy. During breakfast, she heard her aunt discussing with her grandmother about repairing the room with the broken window. They wanted to fix the window as well to prevent Song Kiki from feeling uncomfortable. The moment her grandmother heard that her granddaughter was uncomfortable and was chased to that room by Jinwan, she immediately maneuvered her wheelchair back to her room. She took out 5 not-so-new 100 yuan bills from her piggy bank and handed them to her aunt, asking her to fix it. Yesterday afternoon, when Jinwan was sleeping there, this family did not take the initiative to fix it. They were all granddaughters, but this treatment, haha. Jinwan's impression of her mother when she was young was that she was a talented, beautiful, and opinionated woman. She was born into such a family and environment, yet she was able to study abroad with her scholarship. This meant that her mother was indeed impressive. At the very least, she did not suffer much because of such a family environment. Instead, she knew how to fly out of this place. Chapter 620. Originally, Jinwan planned to leave the next afternoon. However, her grandmother suddenly felt unwell. Her aunt instructed Jinwan to call someone to send her to the hospital. Her intention was for Jinwan to pay for the treatment. Jinwan did not mind. Seeing that her grandmother was seriously ill, she directly called for a car to send her to the hospital. After struggling for a day and a night, she finally returned from the hospital. Her grandmother was only suffering from some elderly ailments and a slight chill from the autumn weather. She was fine. After sending her grandmother back from the hospital, she had just alighted from the car when she saw her aunt hanging out clothes in the yard. Two of them were the dresses that the two sisters had taken from Jinwan. It was likely that they had been washed because they were dirty. Those two clothes could only be dry cleaned and could not be washed with water. Although they could still be worn after washing, they would no longer have their original shape. In any case, they would be very ugly. Jinwan only glanced at them and did not speak. When her aunt saw that they had returned, she asked about the old lady's condition. Knowing that she was fine, she did not ask further. After helping her grandmother back to her room to rest, Jinwan turned around and saw that Song Kiki was chewing on a lollipop. She seemed to be looking for something, but when she saw that Jinwan had returned, her gaze faltered. Jinwan seemed to notice something from her gaze. She abruptly rushed over and pushed open the door to Song Sisi's room. As expected, she saw that Song Sisi had placed Jinwan's laptop on her desk. However, Jinwan's work computer had a password. The two sisters had not been able to figure out the password and had even spilled water on the keyboard. The moment Jinwan saw the darkened screen and the water stains on the keyboard, her temples began to thump. Cousin. Seeing that Jinwan's expression was not good, Song Kiki stood by the door and did not dare to speak. Song Sisi also rushed to move away from the computer. She turned to see Jinwan walking over expressionlessly and rushed to say, "Cousin, I was just curious. I've only seen such an expensive computer in advertisements before, but I've never switched it on. We didn't see your work documents either. But this water. I really didn't mean to spill it. It's all Keek's fault for snatching it from me. That's why I accidentally." Jinwan pursed her lips, picked up the computer and turned to leave. Seeing that Jinwan had left, the two sisters sighed. Song Sisi even muttered softly, "Tisish, what are you pretending for?" Jinwan had already locked the small door from the inside. If she wanted to return to her mother's room, she had to walk outside. Earlier, when she walked out with the computer with a dark expression, her aunt was still hanging clothes. When she turned back and saw Jinwan's expression, she immediately knew what had happened. However, she did not apologize for her two daughters but said with dissatisfaction, "Aya, we haven't been able to buy a computer at home. Sisi and Kiki were curious, so they took your computer to play. I heard that you set a password to prevent others from looking at it. Now that you've taken it back, is there a need to put on such an ugly expression?" Jinua. And, SG, she did not say she returned. And returned. Nuan, she returned. Uncle. Mo Chin G2. She had GGG. Nuan G had to said. B. And had he. B. GG and. She could leave now. There was nothing wrong with the computer. She had a backup in the company. It was just that it was flooded. Even if she waited for it to dry, she did not know if it could still be used. It might affect her work, but it was not a big deal. But at this time, even if she bought a train ticket from G-City to the airport, it would only be available tomorrow morning. Even if she arrived at the airport, there were not many flights in this small city. There was only one flight to High City a day, which was tomorrow afternoon. It was already past time. She could only wait until tomorrow. Jinwan endured until the sky turned dark. She planned to leave early the next morning. Yesterday, when she was taking care of her grandmother in the hospital, there were too many sick elderly people in the small hospital. There were not many beds. She was squeezed into a room with more than 10 people. The people around her kept coughing and the air was foul. She must have caught a cold, or perhaps she did not have a good rest yesterday. She felt dizzy, so she did not have dinner with them. She only went to get some hot water and gave herself a simple wipe in the room. She did not complain that this place was not convenient for her to bathe. Instead, it was her aunt who nagged at her for being too clean and always boiling water for her to bathe. It rained at night. Although G-City was not as cold as Jing City, it was still autumn. The night was still chilly. There was no air conditioning or heating in the room. Jinwan had caught a cold in the hospital yesterday. In fact, it had only been a few days since she had a high fever in Jing City. At 9 o'clock at night, Jinwan's stomach was not feeling well. However, those people did not have any leftover food. She got up, grabbed an umbrella, and walked a long way to a small supermarket to buy a bowl of instant noodles. The rainy night was not easy to walk, not to mention the muddy path. Her pants were wet and stuck to her legs. Her shoes were also soaked. The cold of the autumn rain was bone-piercing. Jinwan stepped through the mud all the way back. The family slept early. It was not even 10 o'clock and the lights in the other rooms were already off. Jinwan couldn't imagine what her mother had experienced when she lived in this place more than 20 years ago, nor could she imagine what kind of story her mother had with Ji Hongwen and Xiao Jinjuan, but this place made her inexplicably feel like she was trapped in a prison. The heavy rain and the road that didn't even have a street lamp in the distance were like a big net that could trap many people here for the rest of their lives. When she rushed back, Jinwan was already drenched. The rain was too heavy. She dragged her cold body back, slightly regretting running so far to buy instant noodles. Just as she was hesitating if she should find a kettle to boil the noodles, she suddenly sneezed. Jinwan raised her hand to rub her nose. She removed her wet clothes and wiped the rain away. She crawled under the blanket to warm herself up. However, after lying down, she only felt her body alternating between hot and cold. The familiar dizziness of being afraid of the cold and having a fever assaulted her. After an unknown period of time, Jinwan seemed to hear her phone ringing in her daze. She shivered under the blanket. She wanted to open her eyes, but her body was alternating between hot and cold. No matter how hard she tried, she could not open her eyes. The rain fell for the entire night and finally stopped when it was close to dawn. On the bumpy path, a black car drove over. There was no one around in the wee hours of the morning. Only the slightly brightening sky reflected the cold light of the car. Chapter 621. In her sleep, Jinwan heard her cell phone ringing again. She poked her head out of the quilt and tried to reach out to pick up her cell phone, but she only touched the edge of the cell phone and then put her hand down weakly, no longer moving. She was very cold, very sleepy, very tired, and did not have any strength. Finally there was a knock on the door. Jinwan furrowed her brows in her sleep. She turned over and glanced toward the door. Although it was already past dawn and there was some light, she could not see clearly in the room. She could only see the wooden door being knocked on. The person outside did not knock very loudly, and since they were outside she was probably the only one who could hear it. Jinwan wanted to speak, but her throat was painful. She looked toward the door and her vision blurred. As the door creaked slightly, she closed her eyes again. He had been knocking on the door for more than 5 minutes, but there was still no movement. Shenmu stood outside the door with some worry. He turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who was dressed in a black coat. The reason Mo Jingshan was certain that Jinwan was staying in this room was because of the heavy rain last night. There were footprints in the mud outside that led directly to this room. There was also a pair of shoes that Jinwan used to wear. However, the shoes were already soaked and there was mud around the heels. They were left outside the door. She was most likely afraid of dirtying the floor. The lights in the other rooms were not turned on. Only this room's light was on. It seemed like it had not been extinguished all night. However, after knocking for so long with Jinwan's usual alertness, it was impossible that she did not hear it. Also, Jinwan's cell phone was in it. Every time he called, her cell phone would ring. Although the ringtone was very soft and wouldn't wake up the people living next door, the familiar ringtone confirmed Mo Jingshan's suspicion that Jinwan was indeed here. We've been knocking for so long. Mo, could it be that Miss Ji only left her phone inside and is not in this room? Shenmu saw Mo Jingshan's cold and heavy expression and hesitated for a moment before speaking. No, in this kind of place she wouldn't leave her phone too far away. The man's voice was cold and calm after a rainy night. But this door? Open the lock. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at the wooden door that was locked from the inside. Shenmu hesitated for a moment before turning around to look for something to pry open the door. They definitely wouldn't be able to find a locksmith in this place, and it would be too late to call the police now. Furthermore, in this kind of place each family's yard was next to each other. If they were to openly open the door and enter, it would only arouse the suspicion of the surrounding neighbors and family members. It would also cause a lot of trouble, and at that time, it would probably affect Miss G badly. But this lock, this kind of door was indeed not as difficult to open as the security doors outside, but Shenmu really did not have any experience in picking locks. He found 2 iron wires and a thin wooden board, and after looking at the door for a long time, he tried to use the iron wire to look for the lock position. Shenmu was hooking the iron wire back and forth in front of the door. He also took a thin wooden board and placed it in the gap of the door to enlarge the gap. Mo Jingshan stood by the side, coldly staring at the wet and muddy shoes outside the door. The weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a hint of worry. Yesterday afternoon he took a flight from Jing City back to Hai City. After returning to the company for a 2-hour meeting, he did not have any time to rest and immediately rushed to G City. There was only one flight a day from High City to G City. Even if they were to rush to the airport and wait for the boarding time, the fastest speed they could reach by car was only 2 hours. Thus, they decided to drive overnight from High City. Jinwan was not stubborn about her birth. This time she suddenly came to G City. It was likely that Ji Hongwen had said something to her. Otherwise, she would not have suddenly come to such a place. For a wooden door in such a small place, the lock on the inside could be considered easy to open. However, due to the iron wire being hooked back and forth, there would still be some slight movements. If it wasn't for the fact that the person inside was not alert, they would have long woken up. The sound of the lock being unlocked came from the inside. Shenmu released a long breath. It seemed like if he wanted to change careers in the future, there might be a place for him in the locksmith industry. "Mo," Shenmu pulled out the iron wire, turning back to look at Mo Jingshan. The man's gaze finally landed on the pair of muddy shoes. He directly pushed the door open and quickly stepped in. Shenmu did not dare to enter. After all, if Jinwan was really sleeping inside, it would definitely be inconvenient for him to enter. Thus, he very consciously waited outside the door while glancing around. The sky had yet to fully brighten, and most of the people here were still asleep. The light in the room was emitted from an old yellow light bulb. It was not very bright, but at least he could see clearly. The moment Mo Jingshan entered the door, the first thing he saw was the wet clothes that Jinwan had thrown on the ground. There was also a plastic bag with a bowl of instant noodles that had not been eaten. There was also an umbrella that had fallen on the ground and was covered with water stains. When he turned to the side, he saw a very ordinary single bed. Jinwan was lying on the bed, covered with a quilt. She lay there motionlessly, with only one bare white arm stretched out and landing by her phone. She did not have time to retract it, but maintain this position. Her brows seemed to be furrowed due to discomfort, and her cheeks were red. It was very similar to how she looked when she had a high fever all night in Jing City. Mo Jingshan approached the bed and placed his hand on Jinwan's forehead. As expected, it was very hot. Every year from summer to autumn, she had to pay special attention to her body temperature. Her body was afraid of the cold, and her old illness of catching a cold and having a fever had not been cured. In the past few months, the weather in China was already hot, but in just a few days she actually had a fever several times. Mo Jingshan could not help but wonder how she had managed to survive in London for 3 years when the temperature was constantly maintained. Jinwan. The man moved his hand away from her forehead and pressed it against her burning cheeks. He bent down slightly to call her name. Jinwan furrowed her brows and did not open her eyes. Instead, she turned over slightly. When she turned over, the corner of the quilt around her opened a little, and Mo Jingshan immediately saw that she was not wearing any clothes under the quilt. He then glanced at the wet clothes on the ground. It was easy to guess that she must have taken off her clothes and laid down last night after being drenched in the rain. The man's expression darkened. He bent down and scooped out the burning woman who was curled up under the quilt. Chapter 622. Mo Jingshan's expression turned even uglier. He removed his black coat and wrapped it around the scorching and naked woman. At the same time, he instructed Shenmu, who was waiting by the door. "Shenmu, go to the car and bring a thin blanket over." Shenmu made a sound of acknowledgement and turned to retrieve a thin blanket from the car. This was the air conditioning blanket in the car. It was rarely used, but right now it could be put to good use. When he entered, Jinwan was currently in Mo Jingshan's arms. Her eyes were closed and she appeared to be unconscious. She was wrapped in a black coat, and there was nothing that should not be seen. However, Shenmu still handed the blanket over and turned to quickly leave. Mo Jingshan used the thin blanket to wrap Jinwan's body from top to bottom. He then wrapped the coat around her and directly carried her by the waist, walking out. It was no longer raining outside, but the roads were still muddy. When Mo Jingshan carried the person in his arms to the car, Shenmu reached out to open the car door. Mo Jingshan carried her into the back seat. At the same time, he did not intend to put her down. He calmly instructed, "To the hospital." G City was a very small city. It was difficult to find a hospital with a good environment. Furthermore, ever since Jinwan was carried out, she had been unconscious. Shenmu turned on the GPS and passed by a nearby hospital. It was the same hospital that Jinwan had previously accompanied her grandmother to see a doctor. After taking a look, he felt that the environment was too bad and quickly drove past it. He headed for the largest hospital in G City 10 kilometers away. The sky had just brightened and there were not many people outside the hospital. The doctor on duty on the first floor of the hospital had just walked out when he suddenly saw a luxury car parked in front of the hospital. The back door of the car opened and a tall man carried a woman out. The woman was wrapped in a blanket and a black coat, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, the man's face was so cold that it seemed as if ice could form on it. "Emergency, call the doctor." Shenmu hurriedly followed after parking the car. When Mo Jingshan carried Jinwan in, he turned to speak to the doctor who was standing outside in a daze. The doctor finally reacted and rushed to follow them to the emergency hall. Jinwan had been sleeping the entire time. It was only when the needle was pricked on the back of her hand that she opened her eyes due to the faint pain. However, she only opened her eyes a little, and her gaze was somewhat dazed and blurry. She could vaguely hear someone saying, "Virus flu." Did the patient come into contact with an unhygienic environment with a large number of flu germs these days? Her body's immune system isn't very good. She caught a cold at the same time, so it's inevitable that she would suddenly have a high fever. Who's talking? Who has a fever? Is she? How could he have a fever again? Before she could figure it out, Jinwan's consciousness gradually sank into the darkness again. She slept for a long time and had a dream. She actually dreamed of Mo Jingshan. She was in G City. How could there be Mo Jingshan? Why did she dream of him for no reason? In her dream, Mo Jingshan sat by the bedside. He picked up the cotton swab the doctor brought over, dipped it in water and placed it on her dry, white lips to moisten them. Mo Jingshan's complexion was not very good. Especially when the doctor came in to take her temperature once more and discovered that her fever had not subsided, his complexion could no longer be described as ugly. Jinwan thought that she was dreaming, alternating between waking and sleeping. This hospital was G City's top A hospital, and the doctor's skills were not bad. Based on her current condition, they could not torture her too much. They could only give her an injection here to reduce her fever and could not move her elsewhere. She could not endure such torment. The woman's hand was pricked with a needle, and there was an IV drip by the bedside. Occasionally she would furrow her brows and moan uncomfortably. It seemed like she was trying to wake up but was unable to wake up. Shenmu went to buy some porridge. By the time he returned, it was already past 10 in the morning. Jinwan had not woken up and was still sleeping. Mo Jingshan had already changed into clean clothes. They were made of warm and soft material. This was a hospital gown, and Mo Jingshan did not plan on letting Jinwan wear it. "Seo Mo, I've bought the porridge, but I'm afraid Miss Ji won't be able to drink it right now." "Put it down first." Shenmu did not say more. He walked over to put the porridge down and carefully opened the lid. He placed the clean disposable spoon by the side. Mo Jingshan used the towel to wipe Jinwan's face. His hand once again touched her forehead and cheeks. She had always been like this. Whenever she caught a cold or had a fever, it would last for a long time. A few days ago, he had been paying attention to her in Jing City to prevent her from having a fever again. In the end, she had only been away from him for a few days. Several years ago, when she had a fever in the Yu Garden, he and Auntie Chen had taken care of her. With someone by her side, she was fine. However, last night, this woman had a high fever in her room and no one cared about her. If he had not rushed over in time, she most likely would have developed pneumonia in such a place. "Seo Mo, you returned from Jing City to High City for a meeting, and then rushed over here. You haven't rested at all. I'll take care of her here. Why don't you rest for a while?" Shenmu softly said. Mo Jingshan glanced at the person on the bed and softly said, "There's no need. You go rest. I'll take care of her." Although Shenmu had driven all the way from High City and ran back and forth, the occasional fatigue on his body could not compare to Seo Mo's mental exhaustion. After leaving Jing City, he had not rested at all. When he came over, he only pretended to take a nap in the car and did not sleep at all. Mo Jingshan took the bowl of porridge and used a disposable spoon to scoop out the thinner rice soup. He placed it by Jinwan's mouth and slowly fed it into her mouth. Although Jinwan was unconscious, it was only because of the high fever that she couldn't open her eyes. It wasn't to the extent that she couldn't even swallow. However, because she was lying down, some soup would flow out of her mouth. Mo Jingshan patiently picked up a tissue to wipe her mouth and then slowly fed her, spoonful by spoonful. From the bowl of unopened instant noodles left on the ground in Jinwan's room, he could tell that she did not eat anything yesterday. If she was not so hungry or had a stomachache, she would not have braved the rain to buy food. This so-called grandmother's home. She had returned to stay for 2 to 3 days, but she did not even eat dinner. Her high fever was not discovered by anyone, and she even caught a cold. The moment he thought of Jin Wan's life in G City and those relatives who did not give her any family treatment, Mo Jingshan's gaze became even colder. His movements of feeding Jin Wan's soup slowed down. Chapter 623. You're awake. The man's voice came from the bedside. Jin Wan paused for a moment before her vision cleared up. She turned to look at the man dressed in a black shirt by the bedside. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, as though she had pressed against him when he carried her to the hospital. If you're awake, open your mouth. Eat the porridge first. You're still receiving injections. An empty stomach isn't good for your stomach. The man's low voice came again. Jin Wan's gaze focused on Mo Jingshan. She was slightly confused. Where was this? Wasn't she in G City? Wasn't Mo Jingshan in Jing City? But why was he here? Was she still dreaming or was she not in G City? Although there were a lot of things in her mind that she didn't understand, she opened her mouth consciously and cooperated with the man's action of feeding her porridge. She ate a lot of porridge in small mouthfuls. She felt much more comfortable as her stomach was no longer empty. Half a bowl of porridge was fed to her. A moment later, Mo Jingshan stood up and returned. He helped her up to lean against the headboard, placed a straw in a cup of warm water, and brought it to her mouth for her to drink. Jin Wan had a fever for an entire night and was already dehydrated. After drinking a lot of water, she coughed several times. It wasn't until the man's hand patiently patted her back that she pursed her pale lips and raised her eyes to look at him with wide, round eyes. Why are you here? Mo Jingshan's expression was as calm as usual. When he heard her slightly hoarse voice, he brought the water to her mouth for her to drink. Jin Wan cooperated and drank a few more mouthfuls. As she was drinking, she heard the man patiently feeding her say mildly, "If I weren't here by the time you returned to High City, you would have already turned into a fool from a fever." Cough. Jin Wan raised her uninjected hand and glanced at the surroundings of the ward. This was the best ward in the hospital in G City. She then saw the sign of G City Central Hospital by the side of the bed and realized that she was still in G City. That was why Mo Jingshan had even come to a small place like G City. When did you come? Jin Wan struggled to speak in a hoarse voice. After speaking, she coughed several times. Mo Jingshan reached out to gently pat her back. Don't be in a hurry to ask. Let's talk about it first. After coughing for a while, Jin Wan hurriedly took the water he handed her and took a big gulp. Then she felt better and leaned against the headboard. Because of the needle in her hand, she couldn't move and could only look at him. Seeing that she was staring at him, it was clear that she still wanted to ask. Mo Jingshan calmly said, "I knew you were in G City, so I came to take a look. I didn't expect that you wouldn't pick up my call since last night. I rushed to your place in the wee hours of the morning and forced the door open." However, after saying this, she raised her eyes only to see that the man only patiently patted her back and poured her a glass of warm water due to her sore throat. When he returned to the bed, he asked her, "Do you feel better now?" Jin Wan's eyes lit up. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't know what to say. Jin Wan nodded. Much better. At the very least, she felt much more comfortable than last night when she was drenched and cold from running back with an umbrella. Perhaps it was because she drank too much water after waking up. Previously, when she was asleep, she had been on an 4-drip. After just a short while, Jin Wan felt the urge to go to the toilet. However, she was too embarrassed to say it. "Can I get off the bed first?" Jin Wan asked as she looked at the remaining medicine in the bottle. "Why do you want to get off the bed?" She did not say it, but she was truly suffocating. She straightened her body and prepared to get off the bed. The man saw that she was clearly weak but still insisted on getting off the bed. He immediately saw through her intentions. "You want to go to the bathroom?" Jin Wan was silent. She had only just sat up. How could he see through her? Jin Wan did not move. The needle in her hand prevented her from moving. She lowered her eyes to look at the back of her hand, feeling conflicted about how she should go. Chapter 624. It was very awkward. Under Mo Jingshan's amused gaze, Jin Wan could only raise her hand. "I want to go to the bathroom." The man's brows moved slightly. He chuckled lightly because she had finally taken the initiative to ask for his help. It was also because of her soft tone. Jin Wan, on the other hand, cursed this man in her heart over and over again. Yet, when Great Boss Missouri finally reached out to help her up, she still had to maintain a pleading smile on her face. Mo Jingshan did not only help her up. When the nurse pushed open the door and entered, He asked the nurse to come over and help take the medicine bottle. He then carried Jinwan up. The young nurse raised the medicine bottle and followed behind. She watched as the tall and handsome man carried her into the bathroom, and her eyes shone with envy. When she saw him carry Jinwan into the bathroom, she was so envious that her face turned red. It was rare to see such a good-looking man who doted on his girlfriend so much. Furthermore, this man's identity was not ordinary. From his dressing, aura, speech and gaze, it was clear that he was not a simple person. He should be his girlfriend, right? Or a couple. Either way, the two of them looked so young. They were either dating or newly married. Otherwise, how could they be so affectionate? Even when going to the bathroom, he had to carry her. The young nurse raised the bottle outside the door and cursed silently. Finally, the bathroom door opened again. When Jinwan was carried out, her face was suspiciously red. The young nurse instantly understood. Usually, patients who were hospitalized for injections because they were not feeling well often needed their family members to help them take off their pants when they went to the bathroom. Earlier on, this gentleman was most likely helping her take off her pants. This was clearly a common occurrence in the hospital. However, the two people before her did not seem to match the image of a patient being taken care of in the hospital. This scene she did not dare to imagine. The more she thought about it, the more her maiden heart was about to overflow. After being carried back to the bed, the nurse helped hang the medicine bottle by the bedside. Jinwan thanked her, and Mo Jingshin nodded slightly at the nurse. The young nurse continued to leave with a red face. Jinwan took another look at her cell phone, which was placed by the bed, but she didn't see anything else. She guessed that when Mo Jingshin took her away, she must have been unconscious at that time, so he only took her cell phone with him. Everything else was still in that room. When she was there, the family couldn't wait to search her inside and out. Now that she was gone and suddenly disappeared, it was likely that many things in her bag would be searched again. "I'll go back in the afternoon to get my things," Jinwan said. "What do you have?" "Just send Shinmu over to get it." "I'll have to take everything in my suitcase and bag with me, but I'm guessing that some important items will be found by my two weird cousins. I'll have to go back and look for them myself, lest I miss anything." Actually, he could leave these matters to Shinmu. However, hearing Jinwan's words, Mo Jingshin only glanced at her and softly said, "Let's talk about it after your fever subsides. I'll accompany you back." Thankfully, Jinwan cooperated and drank more hot water. After the anti-inflammatory and fever medicine was administered, it took another hour for Jinwan's fever to subside. It was already noon. Before Jinwan decided to return, Shinmu had gone to buy some lunch. He allowed Jinwan to eat a little to replenish her energy. She could finally get off the bed and plan to head back to get her things. At her grandmother's house. When everyone woke up early in the morning, they discovered that Jinwan had disappeared. The door was also open. The lock on the wooden door was not clear, so no one was able to guess how Jinwan had left. There were no signs of anyone else entering either. They only saw that her cell phone was gone, so they assumed that she had gone out to buy something. After all, her bag and luggage were still at home. Song Sisi and Song Kiki were used to treating this room as a game room. Seeing that Jinwan was not around, they openly walked in and circled around. They only grew suspicious when they saw the wet clothes on the floor. However, not long after, Song Kiki suddenly spoke up from the side. "Big sister, look at these." Song Sisi turned to see that Song Kiki was holding onto Jinwan's wallet. She had just found it from Jinwan's bag. There were several cards in the wallet, including some business-related financial cards, gold and silver cards, and a black card. Jinwan had yet to step out of the hospital when her phone received several messages from the bank. Most of them were regarding the bank's PIN being entered incorrectly, causing the bank to treat it as lost and freeze the card number. It didn't matter if the card number was frozen. After returning to High City, she could take some time to go to the bank to complete the procedures. However, she never expected that after leaving her bag at home for only a few hours, this family actually dared to touch her wallet and swipe her card. Thankfully, her PIN was not her birthday, nor was it some numbers that these people could guess. Otherwise, it was likely that this family would not have used her card to swipe a few million yuan. The two sisters were in a certain shopping mall in G City. They held various receipts in their hands and were about to pay. However, no matter how they tried, they could not guess the correct PIN. In the end, only the black card was left. The passwords were all wrong. The two sisters were angered to the point of turning green. This kind of black card was used by some banks as a supreme VIP card. Without a deposit of more than 10 million yuan, it was impossible for the bank to issue such a card. Moreover, this card was also divided into several levels. One was the Supreme card with a certain amount of deposit, and the other was the Global Unlimited secondary card. It could be swiped anywhere, and even if the money in the card was not enough, it could be swiped without a limit. The owner of this card had to be trusted by the major banks to be able to use it. When they were at home, they specially used their phones to check online. Anyway, no matter what grade the card was, it was enough to prove that Jinwan was really rich. Because of this, the two of them ran out with Jinwan's wallet. Even if they did not know the PIN, Jinwan's wallet still had her ID card. Originally, they wanted to take the ID card to the bank to withdraw money, but the bank refused because they were not the real person. In the end, the two of them took the card and ID card to various specialty stores to spend money. They bought a lot of gold, silver, diamond jewelry, branded clothes, watches, computers, cell phones, and a bunch of other things. They were all in a shopping mall, and then they took the receipts to pay. In the end, all the cards were used. Each of them had a chance to enter the PIN 3 times, but all of them were wrong. How could it be wrong? What's Auntie's birthday? Could she have used her mother's birthday as the PIN? Or her mother's death anniversary? Chapter 625. Most importantly, before they left, they told their mother about Jinwan's cards. They also told her that there were at least tens of millions of yuan in the black cards. Jinwan's aunt was extremely excited and had them go out to buy things first. She wanted to ask the neighbors where the best houses in G City were. They wanted to move to another house. With so much money, they could at least buy the biggest house in G City. If one wasn't enough, they could buy 2 more for Cici and Kiki, one for each of them near the university. In the end, the two sisters did not spend a single cent on these cards. Instead, they excitedly took a taxi to the city in the morning to buy things. They had already spent several hundred yuan on the taxi and food, and they had all taken out of their own wallets. The last black card ended up being locked due to the same password error 3 times. When Jinwan returned to her grandmother's home, Song Cici and Song Kiki had just returned. Their hands were empty, and their expressions were extremely ugly. Her aunt did not know that the cards could not be swiped. She was sitting in the yard excitedly calling all sorts of relatives, saying that they were going to change houses. She also said that after Cici and Kiki got married, had children and raised children, they would have a large sum of money. She also wanted to buy a few houses near the university and open a shop to do business. She also wanted to invite relatives over for a meal. She had even thought of a hotel for the relatives. It would be the most expensive 5-star hotel in G City. Jinwan had just stepped out of the door when she heard her aunt's voice on the phone. Her excitement was clear on her face, as though the money was already in her hands. She suddenly saw Song Cici and Song Kiki returning. She was about to ask them why they came back empty-handed, but before she could ask, she saw a black car parked outside. As soon as they saw the car, although they couldn't recognize the brand, they could tell it was definitely not cheap. The mother and daughter were all stunned, but then they saw Jinwan open the door and get out of the car. Seeing that Jinwan had actually returned, the two sisters were frightened and rushed to hide her wallet behind her back. When she alighted from the car, Jinwan wore a smile, but it did not reach her eyes. She walked into the yard and glanced at Song Cici, who was trying hard to hide her hands behind her back. "How is it? You didn't even guess a single password correctly?" Jinwan asked with a smile. But although she seemed to be smiling, she suddenly directly exposed their behavior, which was almost equivalent to theft. The expressions on the faces of the two sisters could instantly be described as colorful. Her aunt was startled. Her earlier excitement seemed to have been doused with a pail of cold water by Jinwan's words. No wonder Cici and Kiki had returned empty-handed. Did that mean the two of them hadn't spent a single cent with Jinwan's card? Earlier, she had invited over 10 relatives over for a meal, and even said that they were going to eat at the most expensive 5-star hotel. First aunt's face froze as well. "Give." Jinwan's words. She smiled. Nuan Tang. She had already made herself clear. Song Cici's expression was livid. She held back her anger for a moment and suddenly took out her purse and threw it at Jinwan. However, Jinwan dodged it in time and caught the purse before it fell to the ground. Seeing Jinwan's nimble movements, Song Cici, who had just swung the purse with brute force, was speechless. The two sisters' complexions were very poor, and the eldest aunt's expression was not much better. Seeing that Jinwan's complexion appeared somewhat haggard, she did not guess that she had been in the hospital for an entire morning because of a high fever. She only thought that she had gone out to fool around last night. She immediately reprimanded her. "Since you're so rich, what's wrong with giving some money to your two sisters to spend? You've been back for 2 or 3 days. What have you bought for home? Those small gifts and trinkets probably add up to less than 10,000 yuan. That card of yours has at least 10 million yuan in it. You're really stingy to give such a small gift to your family? Jinwan sneered. Auntie, don't you think too highly of yourself? Don't you know why I came to G City? Even after my mother passed away, you didn't go to High City to visit her. Now that my grandmother is sick, I only came here to see her because of our blood ties. Based on our relationship, I'm already giving you face by coming back. The gifts and supplements I bought are also my sincerity. But I don't seem to owe you anything. Even when my grandmother was in the hospital 2 days ago, I kept a filial heart and stayed by her bedside to take care of her. Even if you want to nitpick, I'm afraid you won't be able to find out what I've done. How can you stand here and say that I'm stingy? Regardless of whether I'm rich or not, even a beggar on the street knows that if they want money, they have to bow down and thank me or show off their talent in singing and playing the eru. You're stretching out your hands, aren't you embarrassed? You? Jinwan directly raised the wallet in her hand. Her eyes seemed to be filled with mockery. Besides, not only did you stretch out your hands, you even dared to steal my wallet. It's only because you're related to my mother that I didn't bother to call the police. Otherwise, I could have detained you and your mother for theft at any time. We didn't steal it. Song Kiki was frightened by Jinwan's sudden toughness and coldness. Yesterday, Jinwan clearly gave them some face on account of her mother and appeared to be tolerating it. But now she even dared to call the police. Song Kiki carefully said, "You didn't lock the door before you left. My sister and I went in to help you tidy up the house. When we saw your wallet on the floor, we took it out to take a look. Anyway, didn't you promise to leave us 200,000 yuan? We were in a hurry to buy things, so we took the wallet and left. Besides, even if we took it, we didn't spend it, right? We didn't spend it and it's all frozen." Jinwan suddenly smiled at Song Kiki. "Don't say that I didn't agree to that so-called 200,000 yuan. Even if I agreed, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to take it out." "Why? You're clearly so rich." Song Sisi was also anxious. She originally thought that they had at least 200,000 yuan to buy things. Jinwan raised the wallet again and waved it in front of her. She was full of smiles. "What? Because the cards have all been frozen." Song Sisi and Song Kiki's faces instantly paled. "How is that possible? You always have cash on you." Chapter 626. The two sisters' expressions faltered. They had indeed searched through Jinwan's wallet. Jinwan did not have much cash in it. As they had been thinking about the money in the card, they had not been interested in the 1 or 2,000 yuan worth of cash and had not touched it. But now Jinwan was saying that she did not even have the 200,000 yuan? Song Sisi and Song Kiki immediately panicked. They turned to look at their mother. The more the aunt heard, the uglier her expression became. She abruptly shouted angrily, "Since you don't plan on giving us a single cent, why did you come back? My things are still here. If I don't come back to take them, am I supposed to leave them for you?" The moment her aunt heard that Jinwan was really planning on leaving and did not plan on leaving them any face, she recalled the promises she had made to her relatives earlier and how her hopes of buying a house and various other things were about to be dashed. She held herself as Jinwan's elder and raised her hand to give her a slap. However, the moment she raised her hand before she could swing it down, her wrist was abruptly held. Jinwan calmly and indifferently looked at her. She shook her hand off, causing her aunt to stumble and take a step back. Just as she was about to scold her, she suddenly saw the door of the black car outside open once more. Two young men alighted from the car. The man who alighted from the driver's seat appeared to be very elegant. As for the man who opened the back door, he was dressed in a black suit with a black coat over it. From the moment he appeared, it was obvious that he was not an ordinary person. The moment Song Sisi and Song Kiki saw Mo Jingshan, their eyes widened. Shenmu followed behind Mo Jingshan. Jinwan saw their expressions and immediately understood what was going on. She turned back to see that Mo Jingshan had already approached. For this man to appear in such a small place, his aura was very different from the surroundings. However, it caused Jinwan's heart to feel more at ease. Compared to a few days ago when she was alone in her grandmother's chaotic home, she felt much more at ease. Although she did not wish to admit it. She felt especially at ease wherever Mo Jingshan was. "Miss Ji, what can I do for you?" When Shenmu was in the car earlier, he saw that this middle-aged woman seemed to want to hit someone. Thankfully, Jinwan raised her hand to stop her and did not stand there to be beaten. Otherwise, COMO would most likely burn down this house in a fit of anger. Thus, when Shinmu spoke, he directly walked behind Jin Wan. He was concerned and respectful toward Jin Wan, but his gaze was cold as he looked at the mother and daughter. His expression clearly showed that they were not to be trifled with and warned them to restrain themselves. Just help me take out the suitcase from that room. Thank you, Shinmu. Jin Wan turned her eyes. Her earlier cold and domineering attitude toward the mother and daughter changed, and she smiled at Shinmu. Shinmu nodded and entered the room that he had personally pried open in the wee hours of the morning. What else do you want to take? Mo Jingshan had already walked to Jin Wan's side. His gaze did not even glance at the mother and daughter. His voice was cold and indifferent. If Shinmu was dissatisfied with their vile behavior earlier, Mo Jingshan's attitude toward them was indifference and disregard. His entire being exuded an unapproachable aura, causing them to not even dare to speak to him out of curiosity. I don't think so. Jin Wan gently patted her purse against her palm. Initially she thought that they would search through her bag and suitcase. However, since they had already taken her purse, it was likely that they would place all their attention on the cards and would not touch anything else. Thus, there was nothing else for her to search. When Jin Wan alighted from the car, she was still dressed in the same clothes that she was wearing when she was lying on the hospital bed. It had just rained last night and the weather was slightly chilly. Mo Jingshan only glanced at her thin clothes before casually removing his coat and placing it on her. Jin Wan, on the other hand, stood motionless. She was well aware of how Mo Jingshan usually treated her in private. In any case, this man would never purposely display his affection in front of others. This was completely out of his instincts to show his concern for her. Suddenly, such a high-class car arrived. Even the driver appeared to be dressed expensively. The other man was even more eye-catching. Furthermore, from his actions of helping Jin Wan with her coat, Song Sisi and Song Kiki thought that they were watching an idol drama. They were both envious and secretly jealous. They did not know what relationship Jin Wan had with this extraordinarily handsome man. Who are you? Auntie asked directly, her eyes sizing up the man from head to toe. In the past, when she saw rich men on television wearing suits, they were mostly sponsored by brands. No matter how she looked at it, it was obvious that they were fake. However, the man before her clearly wore a very formal black suit, yet he wore it casually. There was not the slightest bit of effort, as though he had always been standing in this position. Everything was beneath his feet and no one could easily reach him. He clearly exuded a noble and cold aura that others could not help but look up to. Yet he was unbelievably gentle toward Jin Wan. It was very obvious that he was not someone from the same world as them. The difference between clouds and mud. At this moment, these 4 words finally had a completely understandable interpretation. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He only said to Jin Wan, "If you're cold, get in the car first. Have Shinmu bring out the things. If there's anything missing, have him look for it in the other rooms. It's all right. Compared to Jing City a few days ago, this place is much warmer." Jin Wan's fever had just subsided, so she was slightly afraid of the cold. She was not as weak as Mo Jingshan imagined. However, this coat did indeed make her feel much warmer. "I'm asking you a question. Who are you? How dare you enter our courtyard? Can't you hear what I'm saying by standing here?" Her aunt saw that she was completely ignored and felt a little embarrassed. She could not help but raise her voice. However, aside from raising her voice, it was unable to suppress the man's indifferent and unapproachable aura. Mo Jingshan's gaze finally landed on the middle-aged woman. "As Jin Wan's husband, is there a problem with me standing here?" Her aunt's expression immediately faltered. "It's husband." Jin Wan's expression was also slightly dumbfounded. How could he have the cheek to say the word, husband? She did not have the time to investigate the divorce. He was clearly her ex-husband. She did not speak and only secretly glared at the man from the side. Her aunt's gaze scanned Mo Jingshan up and down several times. For a moment, she did not even dare to show her expression. 2 days ago, she had said that Jin Wan might marry some terrible old man. Her mind buzzed and she felt as though her face had been slapped loudly. Furthermore, this man did not look like a small character. Regardless of whether it was his net worth or his background, he was most likely even more prominent than the Ji family. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.